Chair Quillisi? Here. Vice Chair Nolan?
Here.
Commissioner Lottis?
Good.
Here.
And Commissioner Trent?
Here.
Excellent.
And Commissioner Swift is absent.
Okay. For the Pledge of Allegiance, Commissioner Lottis, would you lead us, please?
Ready to begin? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible.
indivisible, with liberty.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is public communications, the time that's set aside for people who wish to address the Planning Commission on items of city business other than the other agenda items for this evening. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak as part of public comment? Okay, so everyone here is either speaking on an agenda item or not speaking. Very good, we'll move on. Our consent item is the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, June 16th. And I would solicit the commissioners, are there any refinements to the meeting minutes that you see? John, Kathy?
I'm good.
Sounds
Nope,
okay.
Good. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion then for approval of the minutes.
All right, I'll make a motion.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, John. Any discussion? Sherry, please call the roll.
Quillisi?
Yes.
Nolan?
Yes.
Lottis?
Yes.
Trent?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Very good. Disclosure of site visits. We had one site, in this case, 1515 Daly Road. And I guess I'll start. I have been to the site, had no ex parte contacts. Vice Chair Nolan?
I'm familiar with the site and I've had no ex parte contacts.
Okay. Commissioner Lottis?
Yes, me also. I have been to the site and have had no ex parte contacts.
And Commissioner Trent?
Familiar with the site and no ex parte contacts.
Very good. Thank you all. Let's move on then to the public hearing item number 2, a design review permit. Lucas, would you introduce this for us, please?
Yes, thank you. Tonight we have a design review permit that Mara will be giving a short, brief presentation. I believe the architect is here tonight as well. So Mara is going to walk you through the proposal for tonight and staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Lucas. Sorry. Am I on? Yes, okay. And thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. So the property owners of 1550 Daly Road are requesting approval of a design review permit for converting a 38 square foot portion of a second-story accessory structure from exterior to interior space. The space is currently a patio and is proposed to be a kitchen. In 2007, the second story of this accessory structure was approved as a guest house. The installation of a kitchen will afford the property owners the opportunity to convert the guest house to an accessory dwelling unit. The Planning Commission is reviewing the request per the Ojai Municipal Code that all applications for building permits, which include second-story construction to a two-story second residential unit, are subject to review and determination by the Commission. The modification is proposed to be in keeping with the existing exterior elevations. The minor increase in square footage will increase the interior square footage from 680 square feet to 718 square feet. And there are 2 existing windows at the ceiling height, and they will be flush with the exterior and are proposed to be of like kind to the ones now, and then there'll be an additional window below there. The existing single-family residence and proposed accessory unit accessory dwelling unit are consistent with the city's municipal code and general plan, and staff is recommending approval of the project subject to the conditions of approval. Lastly, I want to respond to Chair Quillisi's comments prior to the meeting. In attachment A, that's the resolution, on page 3, condition of approval 12, during the building permit process, the Ventura County Fire Department has a form 610B, and the title of that form is Requirements for Construction. That form is required for all construction and for all, for any project that requires a building permit, I should say. And it's submitted to the fire department, and they determine whether or not sprinklers are required. And when I spoke to the fire department about this one, they said it probably wouldn't be because it's under 1,000 square feet. However, every building permit project is required to submit this form. And then another question that came up in a previous meeting, I think it was actually with the HPC, and then came up regarding this project, is regarding condition of approval 13. The language in this condition is provided by the Ventura County Fire Department. It's taken from Ventura County Fire Code Section 505.1. I reached out to them prior to the meeting, and I discussed the language of this condition. It is not verbatim from the fire code, however, it was provided from the fire department. And specifically regarding elevated post, as to where I think I must have written in there where to put the address numbers. It was confirmed that the address numbers don't have to be on an elevated post. They could be on an elevated post or on a mailbox or on a low wall. They have to be visible, and they can't be at curb height. So, with that.
They have to be prominently displayed for passing first responders.
Yes.
Basically. Okay.
Yes. So with that, if you have any questions of me or of the representative, thank you.
Okay, well, let's hold on just a moment. Any commissioners have questions for staff on this? We covered most of what I asked already, so.
Yeah, I'll just, so I did go up to the site, can't get in because it's locked gate, but I could see enough that I feel that I can evaluate the project. But, so the alcove that will be enclosed is just that one side, kind of facing the driveway then as you enter the site? Is that where you're providing that addition in that area?
It's at the opposite end.
Yeah,
the opposite.
it's actually on the
It's at the
other
south
side.
end.
So where there's two balconies?
Right, so on the other side, opposite the driveway, on the other
So-
side of the building.
So there's two balconies, so those are going to be enclosed? Is that-
Just the one on the other side of the building that you cannot see from the driveway.
Oh,
As you come up the hill,
Okay, 'cause I was
you're
having
looking
to-
at the south end of that
so I'm
building.
looking at this.
That's where the
Right.
deck is that will be enclosed, I believe.
Three balconies on that side. Hi, I'm Jason.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
There's three balconies. Two kind of extend beyond the exterior wall. The one we're enclosing
Is in the middle?
is in the
then?
middle and
Okay.
like in.
Okay.
So we're just flushing out the wall.
Okay, I did have trouble seeing that. I definitely saw the two balconies extending from the building. I guess I didn't really see the middle part, so,
You
have
okay.
to
Thanks
pretty
for,
much be right on the
thanks
wall.
for clarifying that. And your comment on actually, it was easy to find your site because your numbers were posted
Oh, perfect.
pretty clearly
Low wall.
on the low wall, right? So, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
Nope.
Vice Chair Nolan?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Chair
Okay,
Quillisi.
Commissioner Trent?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Then let's hear from the applicant and the architect or the parcel owner or whoever it is that would like to start with this. Please go ahead, sir.
I'll be honest, this is my first planning commission meeting, and I really
That's
don't
true of a
know.
lot of people.
So I'm gonna need some guidance here.
Just state your name and.
I'm Jason Hill.
Your
I work
title.
for
Thank you.
Whitman Architectural Design.
Okay. Typically, we give speakers 3 minutes but in the case of an applicant, we're kind of flexible on that, so
Well,
please go ahead.
I really think Maura covered everything there is. It's 38 square feet of covered patio that we're just flushing out with the exterior wall. We're making it look a lot better, I believe.
You can have a flush wall on the south end of the building now
Yes.
instead of a covered deck in the
Correct.
middle. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for the architect?
No, it's very straightforward. I feel satisfied.
All right. I think the plans were really pretty clear once I
Yes.
realized that north was really north on there, because when I went by the building, I didn't see that sunken deck at
Oh, okay.
first. So I walked around wherever I could,
Right.
trying to look at the building, and finally realized what was going on. Okay, is there anyone, thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else here who wishes to speak on item 2? All right, then we will close the public hearing, and I apologize, I didn't officially open the public hearing. But we'll close the public hearing and come back to deliberation by the commission. Your thoughts? Vice Chair Nolan?
Yeah, I think they did a great job in their preparation. It's very obvious what they want to do and want to achieve. There aren't any conflicts that I can see of. So I feel, like I said, I'm fairly well satisfied with the presentation and don't
Okay.
see any issues.
All right, very good. Commissioner Lottis?
Yes, I agree. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, the ADU requirements were really imposed on the city by the state, and it's mainly a matter of checking the boxes, which you've done. And actually, parking is not really required, but you have plenty of parking out there. So, in my mind, that's a benefit, and it's a small addition, it fits in, and I don't think it would impact any of your neighbors, and yes, I'm fine with the proposal.
Okay. Commissioner Trent? Any
Yeah, I
thoughts?
just echo what everyone else has mentioned. I think it's pretty straightforward. I like that it was already approved as a guest house. I think there's ample parking. So I don't see a problem with it. Looks pretty good.
Okay. I have to say I feel the same way. It's a very minor change. If it weren't for the fact that it was on the second floor, this would have been a ministerial decision, I think, and we wouldn't be having the meeting tonight. And so I think it looks fine. I think it's a very attractive building the way it is, and it'll be even more so when you finish this change. So, do we have a motion on this case?
I'll make a motion.
All right?
I'll make a motion that we adopt design review permit DRP 21-008.
Very good.
Second,
I'll second. Yep.
Okay, I think we got 2 seconds there. That's fine. Sherry, would you call the roll, please?
Chair Quillisi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nolan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lottis,
yes.
Commissioner Trent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Terrific. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, the formula business ordinance. Lucas, would you take us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair Quillisi. Good evening, commissioners, residents of the community, anybody that's listening at home. The item before you tonight, before the commission tonight for review and potential recommendation to City Council is a draft revision to the formula business regulations under the provisions of Section 10-2.1713, which is the formula business establishment regulations. So I want to give a little bit of context to what we're going to be talking about tonight. Give a little history, talk about what the ordinance currently has in play, and then talk about what the ordinance is the proposals for the ordinance as well. So in terms of how we got here, this formula business ordinance has been in play, meaning it's been adopted by City Council since 2007. There've really only been minor revisions that have been done in 2011 and 2012. And really, those regulations remained in play until recently, as recent as April of this year, when the City Council took a closer look at the formula business standards. And at that meeting, at the City Council meeting, had asked for the Planning Commission to take a further look at these regulations. So then we scheduled a meeting for May 19th. Before this Planning Commission. And at that point, there was quite a bit of discussion in regards to the regulations as they currently exist, and felt like there was an opportunity to take a closer look at some of these regulations and come back to this commission with a ordinance, or a draft ordinance at least. While staff, so there was marching orders that were provided by the Planning Commission, and staff then went back to the drawing board and really kind of took a look at those regulations. While that was going on June 22nd, the City Council adopted a moratorium. That moratorium did two things. It lowered the number on a temporary basis from 11, which is where it's at currently, to the moratorium number, which is 5. And then it also created a new feature, which is referred to as collective marketing. And I'll talk about that here during the proposed revisions to the ordinance. So that's where we're at currently. We're here for a public hearing to have a discussion on whether or not there's a recommendation by this Planning Commission to move forward to City Council with the draft ordinance. The ask by the Commission at the time in May was really to kind of take a look at other cities and see what sort of regulations exist, whether or not there's some improvements that could be made, but also to kind of take a deeper dive in terms of what could be done better regarding this ordinance. This ordinance was written more than 10 years ago. So there appeared to be some opportunities. Other jurisdictions that we looked at, I mean, there was like in between 10 and 15 that we looked at. But the ones that I highlighted in the staff report really kind of focus around the city of Sonoma, Sebastopol, Malibu, and there's this interesting community, Bristol, Rhode Island, which has some of the characteristics in terms of the ordinance that have been proposed to be baked within this proposed ordinance that's before the commission for recommendation tonight. So the existing ordinance itself, what does that ordinance currently do? Well, it provides for qualifying features that then define whether or not you fit into the box of a formula business or not into the box of a formula business. And really it's two things. One, it's a numbers game in terms of being 11 or more, and it's whether or not you have qualifying features, 2 or more. And there's 6 features that are identified currently within the existing ordinance. The proposed modifications that are before the commission for discussion and consideration tonight do a couple of things. They create a direct connection with the general plan. I'm not sure that was as strong or as clear as what it is currently proposed. And you'll see that within the underlined sections, which within this ordinance, anything that's underlined is being proposed, anything struck out is being recommended for removal. It also reduces the business establishment trigger. Currently, the code identifies, with the exception of the moratorium, 11 or more. It's proposing 5. Interesting enough, in 2004, when Bristol, Rhode Island adopted their ordinance, they've had 5 on the books since 2004. So it's not something new, but it's certainly something that seems to fit within the wheelhouse of the conversations that have been going on. The other thing it does is there's a creation of an additional feature, and that's the phrase that I used earlier, which is the collective marketing. So that really, and I want to actually read the definition for the collective marketing, because it's a term or a phrase that does not exist in any ordinance that I could find. And I know that Nikhil will speak to this in terms of where it came from, but I want to read the definition specifically because it is it's an incremental, or it's a very important piece to what we're talking about here tonight. So collective marketing means any standardized marketing of the establishment proposed within the city together with other establishments, whether under the same or different names, but using common or uniform marketing means, ads, sales portals, physical or electronic commerce platforms, or internet or digital marketing materials, or sales platforms. It goes on to say collective marketing includes, but is not limited to, any internet or digital media or sales portal that allow consumers to purchase goods or services from the establishment located within the city, and also makes purchases from the other qualifying establishments sharing at least one other standardized common or uniform feature under this. And then it goes on to say the subsection, which is the section within the definition we're talking about. So the last thing that it does, so that's the collective marketing definition that's been proposed tonight as well. We're creating exemptions within this section. There was an exemption, there currently is an exemption within the code. We're calling those out, giving it kind of a nice little neat pocket, an area in which those exemptions can live now and potentially into the future. So with that, that's the proposal tonight. So staff's recommendation is to recommend approval of the draft. It's the draft resolution that includes the draft ordinance that would then go before City Council for final consideration. So with that, if the commission has any questions, Nikhil may want to say a couple words too.
Yes. So before we get into the discussion, I just want to, just as a quick heads up to Commissioner, reminder, or a word of caution, is that I would recommend not discussing any specific businesses because the purpose of this agenda item is to consider the revisions the staff has brought to the ordinance itself. We don't want to discuss specific, there may be comments from the public about specific businesses, but I would caution members of the commission from not discussing specific businesses because those businesses may come up before the commission at a future date, and why I don't think any commissioner wants to recuse themselves or make comments as to any of those particular businesses. So, and it's out of the scope of this particular ordinance. You can suggest, speak in general terms or make references to a business that does this, but I would avoid discussing any specific businesses or locations or addresses.
Okay. Thank you for the warning. Any questions for staff from the commissioners?
Not
Hearing
yet.
none. I have a couple, and Lucas and I have exchanged some thoughts on paper already about it. As you mentioned, the City Council set up some new rules in their urgency moratorium. But those are not the only things that we are looking at tonight, correct? We can suggest changing those. We could suggest adding other things which you have in here now.
Yeah, so back in April, when the City Council took a closer look at this and kicked it back to this commission, it was to look at the ordinance as it's currently written and whether or not revisions, wholly or partly, were necessary.
And the City Council's moratorium, as it exists, only goes to 45 days unless council wishes to
Unless they extend it again.
And
Yes,
so
correct, yes.
that's independent of the ordinance here, to a certain extent.
Okay. Let me see. As I understand it, the primary change that we're making here is to add to the list of criteria by which something might be judged to be a formula business, correct? I mean, there's other little things in here, but That's the big change.
That is one of the biggest changes
And
that we're looking at.
and the
here.
number going from 11 or 10 to
Right.
5.
That was the biggest thing until this collective marketing definition is being
And
introduced.
that.
And I would say
that was
they're
really
hand in hand.
spurred by the discussion around a business in town which now has a business license, correct?
Yes, there is a business that has a business license, yes.
Yeah. And on that point, you know, the city, as I think Lucas explained, was the first one to kind of do this, include the idea of collective marketing. No other city, from our research and staff's research, has adopted it. However, I think one thing to recognize is that the collective marketing as it exists is addresses the fact that not necessarily all businesses are, you know, we're in a digital era where, you know, businesses are marketed at a different level. We're including digital, online, or through social media, and so
Sure.
perhaps that, I think maybe there's the intention at that point, if this with this particular amendment is sort of brings our ordinance into at the most cutting edge, I think is be a reasonable way of putting it.
Okay. Assuming for the moment that the proposed changes to the ordinance are approved by the Planning Commission and recommended to the City Council, does that have any effect on the holder of any current business license in the city?
No, it does not.
It does not. Okay, that's what I thought. The other thing that I'd like to clarify is regarding the number. We received a communication today saying that another business in town had just been bought by somebody and raised the specter, I think, of collective marketing there. Does this have any effect on that business's current business license? For example, if a business were bought by a conglomerate in somewhere outside the city and then became part of a group of more than 5 stores with collective marketing, would that business retain its business license? Would it be required to reapply for a CUP that it perhaps didn't have to before?
So let me just clarify something. The moratorium reduces the number to 5,
Right.
5 or more. It also creates this collective marketing, which
Right.
we're providing a more clarifying definition than what we have currently, right?
Right.
That's the framework in which we're working within, right? So each business that even comes forward, even today, tomorrow, if we're reviewing a business license, we're reviewing it based on that revised temporary revision to and including the moratorium itself. So those are the new standards currently, right, on a temporary basis.
Yes.
What we're looking at here tonight is something that falls in line with that moving forward, and then beyond that to a certain degree. So the 11 or more discussion in terms of how the code reads in its plain language, that number, that's no longer the ceiling. That number, that new ceiling is now 5. Period. That's where we're at right now with the moratorium. So just to clarify that.
And then one other point is that each sort of business, each new business or each business that comes in is judged on its own, is judged on its own merits and has to fit into the bucket of the 7, now, I mean, under the moratorium, 7, previously 6 criteria, of which 2 have to be in play for it to be a formula business. So without being able to comment on a specific business, it would entirely, I mean, for any new business that wishes to open in the city, it would have to, the judge, what the staff would judge would be whether it fits into 2 of the criteria, making it a formula business subject to the moratorium, and then subject, even if the ordinance is passed, subject to the ordinance, or if it doesn't, and would operate as it wishes. So with only
Right,
one of the
okay.
criteria.
Yeah, and during my presentation, I had identified that whether it fits within that CUP box or that bucket, or it's outside of that bucket, right? Does it fit within that bucket, meaning two features and the number, right? It's not an or, it's an and. If it fits into that bucket, then we're looking at a CUP. It becomes a part of the definition, and we're reviewing it and making that business aware of the CUP.
Right, okay. If there is a business in town that is currently operating but got a regular business license without a CUP, and at some point in the future, it is determined that they are now a formula business, do they have to come back in for a
No.
CUP?
No,
Or
they're
the
considered.
business license, as long as you pay the fee every year, you can keep the business license?
Yeah, so they would be determined non-conforming at that point.
Okay, okay. A distinction without a practical difference in this case, I think. Okay.
Chair Quillis, if I could jump in here real quick. This is Matt Summers. Sorry for my delayed
Oh, hi, Matt.
joining in, City Attorney. The difference would come in two forms. One, if a business that is currently operating that becomes within the definition of formula business, either by a change in the definition as is contemplated through this ordinance, or by a change in the business circumstances. You could imagine, as an example, an Ojai eatery that sells Ojai burritos, that then starts to franchise and becomes a success nationally. At some point, it would click over from permitted from 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At some point, it could become a formula business by virtue of growth in the business. If either of those situations happens, that business in Ojai becomes legal nonconforming and may continue to exist, provided it complies with the other applicable provisions of the code. But as a legal nonconforming business and a formula business, its expansion within the city would be subject to the formula business ordinance limitations. So if in my example of Ojai burritos, they have one in town and they franchise nationally, and then they wanted to open a second in town, they may not be able to do so because the formula retail ordinance, as currently structured and as contemplated, prohibits fast food formula retail. So they would keep the one they already have, but may not be able to open a second location in the city. Say that would be their 20th location worldwide. So it is a distinction with a difference, but in those kinds of contexts.
Okay, thank you. One other, I know if the Planning Commission approves a CUP for a business, that CUP stays with the property, or stays with the parcel, I guess, as long as the business doesn't substantially change or something, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
And it continues to meet the permit condition, the conditions of the CUP.
right, okay. And as Mr. Summers said, then if you became a formula business, but you were already legally here in business, not as a formula business, then you don't have to start abiding by a new set of rules.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Any other questions from commissioners?
I just have one question. So I know it's in the existing code, but how did we alight on having the formula business being 2 or more? What, do we have any rationale for that?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of interesting, when I don't know that I necessarily have the history on why the city chose 2 or more, but I can tell you in looking at other jurisdictions, 2 or more is pretty common. It's pretty common practice. And using a lot of these same criteria, these features that we're talking about, maybe worded slightly different, even as far east as Rhode Island, you're seeing a lot of similarities in terms of maybe changing where and in which these apply, but a general understanding of the purpose behind the formula business regulations is uniform to a certain degree. So
2 or more, yeah.
Okay.
Just, I know it's in the existing ordinance, but I just wondered why, so, okay.
The other understanding I have of the history there, without having lived through it in full, is that many of the models, as Lucas noted, that we've seen in other cities were all developed from the nonprofit advocacy group, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR, and their model recommends use of a two-factor trigger. And so I think that's part of the genesis of where our existing ordinance and its two-factor trigger came from. But as I said, I didn't live through it, so I don't know for sure. Thank you.
Chair Quillisi?
Please, Vice Chair Nolan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple questions, and this is Exhibit 1, Attachment A, page 3 of 6, number 5, and this is where we're getting into like square footage. But my first question on number 5, it says no conditional use permit shall be issued for a use that is a formula business located within the area of the downtown commercial land use designation of the city's general plan. And my question with that is, how does that, I'm just thinking of, different businesses that we've had go in. Could that be affected in the VMU or even in the M1 where we have some other businesses that have gone in? Or how is it defined to just be that downtown commercial, or should it be expanded?
Have those maps in the back?
So the way this ordinance is written currently has specific standards baked
Right.
into the downtown commercial area, which by the land use element provides boundaries.
Okay,
But it's citywide as well. So there's two pieces to that puzzle, right? So if it's within the downtown core, there's these certain parameters in terms of findings.
right,
And then if you're outside of that, then there's still these parameters in terms of findings as well. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's really, that focuses itself on the CUP aspect in terms of how we'd be looking at this.
Right. And so, just to tag on to that point, Section 5 really creates the findings for commission to consider when issuing a CUP specifically for the downtown in the downtown commercial land use designation. But the formula business ordinance applies citywide. But these are specific to this particular area.
right. And then just kind of a basic question: how did you establish the square footage or the 25 linear feet? What is that based off of, or based from?
That's not a change in the ordinance. That's currently baked into the ordinance. And looking at other cities, there's really only a small handful of other cities that actually use this performance standard, I would call it, exceeding the 25 linear feet. Other cities use a much larger, I've seen as large as 65 linear feet.
Right.
Here, we're
And I
looking
think-
at 25.
I think where I'm going with that, or just kind of where I may have a question is, especially in our downtown commercial area, the frontages are, for the most part, fairly small, or as far as linear feet goes. But, for example, if you had a formula business coffee company that didn't need or that fell under that 25 feet, then they'd still have to meet the other criteria as well, and then possibly not get their CUP?
Remember,
Does that make sense?
the
I'm not sure what-
the requirements here are that it be in the downtown commercial designation and that it be a formula business. So even
Right.
if, say, there's a large department store in town that has more
Right.
than 25 feet of frontage, and that would, as I read it, that's not in conflict with this ordinance as it's written or as it's proposed, because it's not a formula business.
Right, I understand that, but I was referring to, let's say they're a formula business, I'm just gonna say it's a coffee house or a coffee shop, nationwide, actually worldwide. But some of their establishments are very small. And it didn't exceed that 25 linear feet, would they get kicked out, so to speak, because they don't meet the other criteria? In other words, that now we're talking about 7 criteria. We used to have 6, now there's 7, as far as like signage and color and uniforms and, standardization, so to speak.
We're still on subset 5, correct? Is that what?
Yeah.
So,
Maybe-
Vice
maybe-
Chair Nolan, I think I understand your question. If you
Okay.
had a worldwide coffee company,
Yeah.
perhaps that started in Seattle, and it
Yes.
came in with a proposal for a little tiny outfit in the arcade that had street frontage of
Less than.
less than 25 linear feet and a business of less than 2,000 square foot.
Correct.
So if it was lower than those numeric triggers, then it would not be prohibited by sub B5. However, it would still have to go through, if it met 2 or more of the 7 triggers, which the one
Okay.
would meet those, it'd still have to go through the rest. In other
Well,
words,
that's what I thought. Okay.
5 says that that a no CUP can be issued if those numeric triggers are met.
Okay.
But if you are littler than those numeric triggers, you still have to get the CUP through the Planning Commission. And so
Okay.
you still have to make the findings in C3 that perhaps couldn't be met in that case. And the other one that would be worth noting is in this example we're using, so a global coffee company that sells coffee in to-go cups, that might also be barred by B2,
Right.
which prohibits any formula business from being approved that has at least 2 of the following 3 characteristics.
Mhm.
Short order or quick service food or drink,
Right.
serves drink primarily in disposable containers, and you pay before you consume the food.
Right.
Any global coffee company has all 3 of those. So that probably would prohibit that situation anyway,
Okay.
but even if the numeric trigger were not met.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly. So essentially, this is just another filter, so to speak, that, somebody would have to go through if it was to be located in the downtown commercial designation. Okay.
Right. And one thing to remember for those who don't have their maps right handy, although I think they're in the back of the
Have them in
packet.
the back. Yeah.
Yeah, the downtown commercial area isn't shown on the zoning map. It's
Right.
shown on the general plan land use
And
map.
you, which we usually have.
On the copy I have, it's sort of a bright pink, labeled DC 1.5 FAR. It's the area that's roughly bounded. It's the Arcade Plaza plus
Right.
a little bit further on the north and south sides of Ojai Avenue,
Mhm.
roughly between Blanche and Montgomery,
Right.
block north of south, roughly. So that's the area that's subject to these additional numeric triggers.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was clear and understood. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, and as Lucas and I have discussed in Section 2, at Exhibit 1, Page 2, Section 2, you've revised the code call out there. It's just a simple typo. Should be in
Yes,
Title 10, not
the
in
section
Title
5-4, which should actually read 10-2.
Okay.
Correct, yes.
Okay, so I'm not understanding the boundaries quite yet. So
It's hard to read.
downtown commercial, could you just say it in words? Is it only on the north side of
No,
Ojai Avenue?
it's the south side of Ojai Avenue as well. There's a couple slivers south of Ojai Ave, which are included. Now, remember, this is
Starting at what cross street?
I don't have the map in front of me, but
Is it starting?
Commissioner, it's not exact. It's not quite easily to say in precise phrasing because it's parcel by parcel. So it's roughly the northeast corner of Blanche and Ojai Avenue, the northwest corner, that whole block bounded by Blanche, Matilaha, Signal, and Ojai Avenue. Then it's the 3 parcels to the southwest corner of Ventura and Ojai Avenue. It's the entire arcade area, which is bounded by Ventura, Matilaha, Montgomery. By Signal, Matilaha, Montgomery, and Ojai Avenue. It is also the properties on the southern edge, southern side of Ojai Avenue, on both sides of the intersection with Montgomery, from the edge of Livy Park over east to the intersection with Montgomery, all properties at front Ojai Avenue. And then on the east side of South Montgomery, it's the property at the corner. It's the 4 properties at the corner of South Montgomery and Ojai Avenue, south to, I believe that's the Agave Maria restaurant. And then over about halfway down the block on Ojai Avenue, roughly to the line of the intersection with North Montgomery, as more precisely described in the mapping. It's not, in other words, it's not cleanly bounded by street. Mm-hmm. It's intersection plus a little bit, intersection plus a little bit, if that makes sense.
Okay, but, and interestingly, but it's not including the school district building.
That is correct. As currently mapped, the school district is part of the quasi-public general plan land use designation, not the downtown commercial land use designation, and therefore is not subject to this additional trigger because the school district property is not
solid
currently
black
zoned for
line that
anything
has a
commercial.
different meaning. The original redevelopment area, I presume, or the statement of theme. It's one of those.
Yes,
But it's not
the school
included. It's
property
not
is also-
included, so,
Not
okay.
included.
Yeah, it's also in there. I also believe it's part of the one of the 2 applicable design guidelines for the area, although I confess I don't have those memorized, so I'm not entirely sure which it is. But as to the school district property, right now it is not subject to these triggers because no commercial land use is allowed on the school district property, period. None is allowed because it's only zoned for public, quasi-public uses like the school district. If and when the school district were to apply, or anybody that might lease the property to, were to apply for a commercial program, then that would require a general plan amendment and a land use amendment, or zoning map amendment, and would be assessed at that time.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Any other questions for staff or the city attorneys?
Yeah, I got a couple questions.
Please go ahead, John.
So the term collective marketing, where did we get that? How did we come up with that?
Locally developed.
Is that
So that is something we developed on our own, addressing a specific concern from the community and council regarding, the way of marketing businesses and whether our ordinance, say, is cutting edge enough to pick up that sort of marketing.
Got it. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Was there any consideration on, well, I won't go into that. On May 19th, there was some areas to look into further research. I just didn't see the research outlined yet, but did you guys look at methods to establish ownership and definitions on small, medium, and large business definitions? I just didn't see where those were outlined.
So the small, medium, and large, I can respond to that. The ordinance itself is identifying that it be removed and more of a general terminology be identified. When I looked up and researched the small, medium, large business classifications, it talks about small being somewhere in between 0 to 50 or 0 to 100 employees, and then 100 to 250 for medium, or 100 to 500 for medium. There was kind of a range there. And then anything over 500 or over 250, depending on the definition you were looking at, had been identified as a large business. It didn't really feel like that fit kind of Ojai's formula in terms of how we've been growing over the years or identifying ourselves. So removing those seemed like a much better option. Looking at those in terms of identifying them as independent definitions didn't seem appropriate either.
Okay, and then can you touch on the method to establish ownership? Was that something you looked at?
I think that's actually isn't that partially covered within the collective marketing, or is that not?
Well,
So
The plain language does not include it, at least as I read it.
we have taken a look at that question, and our rough conclusion, or well, not more than rough, our thought through conclusion is that we can't straight regulate ownership. And to use an extreme example, Jeff Bezos is the world's richest man. He could open a coffee shop in Ojai, and that would be perfectly legal if it were run fully and marketed fully independent. So if he were to buy, or he owns Whole Foods, so we'll use that as an example. If he were to open a tiny Whole Foods that did nothing but sell coffee, that would be prohibited because Whole Foods is a national trademark. It would be quick service food. It would be marketed together with the other Whole Foods on their website. All those triggers will be met and thus prohibited. But if he were to open a Bezos coffee in Ojai, and there's no other Bezos coffees elsewhere, and he doesn't market them collectively with at least 5 other establishments, and he didn't hit any of the other triggers for a brand, then it wouldn't be illegal. And more to the point, I don't think we have the power to prohibit it. Looking at it as a city, we are limited to our power being about land use and about the ability to regulate the look, the feel, the operations, the aesthetics, the size, the character of businesses that are operating in the city, but not to regulate the wealth or the market power of their owners. And that's why I realize that the business community is probably concerned that I say this, but that's the reality. We aren't able to straight prohibit entrance to our community's business with significant market power from entering the community. We can require that if they do enter it, they do not do so in a collective marketed fashion. And we've put together the definition, and we're obviously open to adjustments. This is a workshop, if you will, public hearing. But I don't think we would have the power to simply assess how many other businesses do you own and prohibit someone from owning Ojai plus 4. The test is how they're run, how they're operated, the collective marketing component, trademark, decor, uniform, etc. Thank you.
and just
Got
to
it. Okay.
add to that
Makes sense.
point.
Thank you for that clarity.
And Commissioner Trent, just to add to that point, on page 4 of the staff report, I think we've discussed, there are certain circumstances, as Mr. Summers pointed out, that where we reach the limits of our land use and police power, and that we can't, and while I understand the concern, our land use power can't necessarily prohibit a business being operated at a loss by an individual. It can't prohibit, but what we can do is what we define in the 6th criteria, now the 7th that we're adding, and that's really the key. Is that while we can't necessarily regulate, say, the capitalism, we can regulate how the business operates in the city.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you for that clarity.
All right, any more questions for staff or attorneys? All right, then let's open the public hearing, and we will start with Paula Power. Please come forward. You have, as is the custom throughout all the operations here, 3 minutes to address the commission. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come to the meeting and speak to you. My name is Paula Power. I live at 157 South Pueblo in Miners Oak, so I don't actually live in the city. I'm a retired biologist from Channel Islands National Park. I was born in Oxnard. I grew up in Ojai, went to all the Ojai schools, lived other places, but like so many people, I came back to Ojai in 2004 and bought a house. So I've always been very supportive of I've always been very supportive of the local businesses and done my best to shop locally because I know that that's what keeps the character of Ojai what it is. And I've also been supportive of the role that the city and the county has played in supporting local businesses by establishing the guidelines and the codes to limit franchise and formula So I had some other things that I wanted to say, but after listening to how you're discussing modifying the plan, what I would like to add to that is that I think you should reduce the business trigger to 4 and not 5. And it seems like you should expand the footprint. If I understood your description of the map of where this ordinance would cover, it seems like you should think bigger and think broader instead of just limiting it to the core. Ojai's not getting smaller, it's only getting bigger. I thought the collective marketing, the term is kind of scary, but I like the idea. I do have one question about, and I'm not sure if it's under your jurisdiction, but when you drive down Grand Avenue and you see those big signs that say creative, it seems like, how does that fit under any ordinance in the valley? I don't know if you've seen those, but drive down Grand Avenue in Orange Grove, big signs that says creative, and that's a big business. Google creative, spelled with a K, and you'll see it. It's like, what's up with that? Just in closing, I want to say that I'm really happy to see that the city is taking steps to limit formula businesses and that they're supporting businesses that are owned and operated by people who live in the valley and support the lifestyle that we have here and that's so attractive to all of us and is attractive to others. And I do have one question I hope you can answer is, it's not clear to me how far your jurisdiction is. Like, I live in Miners Oaks and I know that that's county, but we're all influenced by what happens in Ojai, so how far out geographically?
The Ojai city government, including this commission, has jurisdiction over the land within the city limits only. We may have some influence. There is a larger area called the sphere of influence.
Well, that's what I'm interested in.
That is not an area over which the city government has any legal jurisdiction. Only within the city limits.
So
and the city limits are roughly 4 square miles.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
So it's fairly small.
So those signs on Grand Avenue, that's a county issue?
That's correct. Those are outside of the city, and so the city's land use power doesn't apply to those signs. And then really quickly on your point, the ordinance, just to clarify a misconception, the ordinance, formula business ordinance applies citywide. The specific numeric restrictions on the square footage and frontage only apply in that downtown commercial zone.
Okay.
But the ordinance itself applies to everywhere where the city is.
It's the 25-foot.
Yes, that's only in the downtown commercial.
Okay,
But the actual ordinance regarding those 7 factors applies citywide.
Okay, within the city limits.
Yeah.
So regarding the sphere of influence, what is included in the sphere of influence?
The sphere of influence is a term that's often used when the city is being asked to comment on things that are within the sphere of influence but don't touch the city directly. There's specific laws on what the city can and can't do within the sphere of influence. But with respect, I think where your question is that the city's land use powers are only stop at the border of the city. They don't go beyond the city. And so the city has the right to comment and may do so at the county LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, about certain things or before the supervisors, but the county's police and land use power stops at the city.
And one more point on that one, this under the county general plan and a subset of it, the Ojai Valley Area Plan, the county is required to consider the city zoning code for any development project within the sphere of influence and within the wider Ojai Valley area as defined by the county, which is essentially more or less the Ojai Valley bounded by the area between 150 to Casita Springs out to the lake and over to Upper Ojai, roughly. And the precise maps are available on the city's website. In that area, the county is required to consider the city's general plan and generally cannot approve a land use that is inconsistent or with the city's general plan absent certain rare findings. But the enforcement of that, unfortunately, falls to the county. And so I'm not familiar precisely with the signs you're describing out on Grand Avenue, but that certainly would be something that would be worth a conversation with the county planning to have them take a look at how those are consistent
That's
with the county's Ojai
unincorporated
area
county
plan, which
land.
requires consideration of the city's general plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Next speaker card on item 3 is Cindy Convery. Please come forward.
Hi, Cindy Convery, Ojai resident, and I am here to ask you to take a little more time with this ordinance. I think you did a very good job bullet pointing what needs to be done. The language is so complicated that needs to be put in. You know, I think this opens Ojai to lawsuits for sure, and I'll just bullet point a few of the reasons why I think that. You've talked about the collective marketing, but the definition, I mean, this is something that you guys came up with. It's something brand new. And the definition needs to be much more formalized. I think it needs to have an IT expert. Somebody from Stanford needs to come and talk about what collective marketing is online, IP addresses, that kind of thing. It's just way too loose. And, you know, the business model has changed so much since 2007. There's so much more money. Ojai's so much richer, and people are targeting it. And these people have, you know, a lot of force. They can come in and do a lot. So I really think that the language needs expertise in its specific field. And I want to say again, I think you did a great job, but you really need to go to San Francisco, talk to the city attorney. They spent a year doing their formula ordinance up there, and that was really directed toward neighborhoods, Noe Valley, Potrero Hill, Dog Patch. You know, it wasn't about Union Square and Macy's or whatever, but it's about character in neighborhoods, which is exactly what Ojai is looking for, and San Francisco had the money to really dig into it. I'm sure I can call them, I know them, I think they'd offer to help us. So that's, you know, something that is worth looking into expertise. And just some examples of other expertise reasons. I mean, the collective marketing issue, but also the CUP conditions, which you, Steve, asked questions about, Kathy's asked questions about. I think that is open to so much interpretation that could, again, end up in litigation. And that is something that they can really target, you know, because it can be very fluid in that interpretation. So I do think there needs to be expertise on the conditional use permits and how that works. I think talking about a store that opens in Ojai and then becomes a national issue is, the percentage of that is fairly low compared to the percentage of the money that wants to come in here. And I'll reference the Creation Company that was just brought up. It's in the county. It's a juice company started in LA. They have 17 or 18 locations. They bought 20 acres on the East End. They have billboards all around their property. There have been many complaints filed with the county. The billboards are illegal. They've been noticed. They're on a 30-day notice to deal with it. But they're already coming in and doing what they want. They're doing it in the county. And they want to open a store in Ojai. You know, they're probably, sorry, my 3 minutes are up. I hope you'll allow me. They're probably trying to figure out ways of manipulating our ordinance. You know, that's what they're doing. They're doing it to the county. They've been noticed. They didn't take down the signs. And that, to me, is the path to litigation. So, you know, we can't really afford as a town to have this kind of thing be loose, because it's just going to cost more in the end. It's do it right, you know, do it right to begin with, and you'll save money in the long run. So, you know, one of the other examples that I looked at was the definition of 5 or more. And in some cases in the ordinance and in the paperwork that follows, 5 or more is appropriate. But in some instances where 5 or more has been used, it should be 5 or less. You know, one of the things is the city council intends to limit formula businesses to those businesses with 5 or more establishments. It should be 5 or less establishments. You know, I mean, this is the kind of thing, 5 or more characteristics, 5 or more businesses that are formula businesses can't be here. But you can't limit it to a business with 5 or more. Well, anyway, the language is tricky. I mean, my example of not being able to explain it shows you how tricky it is. I think this is where you need to bring in expertise, people who have done this before. Nobody on our city council, our planning commission, we haven't had anyone in our town having to do this. And Sherry and I and Barbara, I think, are the only people in the room who were here in 2007 when this ordinance went through, and that took probably a year. So, I just ask you, it's only been 6 weeks since May 19th, 5 weeks since this was first here. So I really ask you to recommend extending the moratorium and having expertise brought in to define the language.
Okay,
Thanks.
well, extending the moratorium is not within the power of the commission, it's
No,
the city council.
recommendation.
Is there a particular characteristic that, in your opinion, falls under the definition, or should fall under the definition of collective marketing that is not in here?
I'm not an IT expert, but I do a lot with online and websites and startups, and I work with Silicon Valley people, and the language is very definitive, and it's very complicated. And I would look to that world to define collective marketing. It's a new term. I mean, as a brand new term in a small town, it's open to attack, and it's open to interpretation. So I would look to deep expertise to really define what that is, tighten
Okay.
it up.
Okay,
Pretty straightforward. Anyway, thanks.
all right, thank you very much. Is there anyone else present or online who wishes to speak on item 3? Please come forward, give us your name, and are you a city resident or not a city resident?
I'm named Barbara Bowman, and I have got, I'm a landlord within the downtown district to a number of locations, and I am a brick and mortar retailer downtown. So I've been doing this for 41 years now, and a landlord for that long. So both, I think Cindy pointed out some very good things for you to reconsider, because it's what's happening now, and I'm speaking even as a landlord who could probably get much higher rents, but I think it could ruin Ojai. I think it's so imperative, because what's going to happen is I think you're going to have to take into consideration in this language the actual landlords, the person who is leasing the property, that they should not lease knowingly to a formula business. In other words, they have to be responsible too, because someone can go wave money in front of them, and they can wait to get a business license, like we just experienced that with somebody with 11 stores, and then they get the business license after the fact because the landlord rented to them before they had the business license. So I think you have to make it very clear as the steps they have to go through, and that the landlord cannot knowingly go and rent to a formula store or a chain store, because I think both parties are responsible. And the problem here, I see people buying properties that have been held by families for years, that have been held by individuals like me for years, and then when they're sold or passed on, these people are looking to get higher rents. So they're going to look to go where they can get the higher rent. And that could change this town within 5 years. I mean, the turnover could be so tremendous that nobody would recognize it, because there would no longer be what the expression mom and pop store, or people living here, because who could afford those kind of rents? So I really think that Cindy's right in the sense that you have to be very careful of the language, so that people who I call city slickers come along, and they're used to dealing with these kind of problems, and this is how we can get around this, because look how they wrote that, and this leaves us an opening here, and the landlord says, oh my gosh, I didn't know I did that, but I've already got the lease and I've got their money. I mean, there's 100 things. Everybody has to be responsible and have to go through steps. And I think if you do that and it's really clear, you can stop things before they get started.
So you're proposing that there be something in the ordinances that says
About landlords.
a landlord cannot knowingly rent to a formula
Absolutely.
business.
Absolutely.
And how would a landlord determine that?
Well, because a landlord, when somebody comes to rent from you, you do a check on that. You check them out online, you check out who they are. Any landlord that's going to rent a commercial space is going to look at the background of the person. It would very quickly become obvious. I mean, I know everybody's ever rented from me everything about them, or you don't rent to them, because they either go in and they change your building, they do construction, you want to know it's for long term. So it's very easy to establish whether someone that you're renting to is a formula business or a chain. But I think it's very important that also goes in the ordinance. I think that would save you a lot of heartache of somebody coming back and saying, well, now you're ruining my business, I can't rent to anybody. I mean, all of the back stuff that could come up. And so, I thank you, number one, thank you so much for the consideration you're giving this. I mean, I listened to the last meeting we had, and I really think that it's thoughtful, and I think we're all learning this because I think it came as a tremendous surprise. None of us, we all thought restaurants. We never thought in terms of brick and mortar, just regular retail. So I think we all got a big surprise for it. But I think you're doing a really thoughtful job. And I think Cindy's right, maybe just check out a little bit more, a little more careful, make it as ironclad as you possibly can, and you will save yourself problems in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Anyone else here present that wishes to speak
Sure.
on item 3?
Chair Quillisi, there's a person on the Zoom system, Meg Goodwin, who wishes to comment. I don't have the power to promote her to the position by which she can make a comment through the Zoom system, so I'll ask James Hahn to
can you
take care
do
of that. Thank you.
She's been promoted.
Okay, she has been promoted, I hear.
Oh, thank you, commissioners. And, I finally have some video. I just really want to thank you all, and Lucas, especially, and Mr. Summers, for their work on this ordinance. And I think one thing I'd like to say is a simple way to look at the collective marketing is the business selling anything specifically from or specific to Ojai, or are they just using their location here for marketing, as in they have a location in New York, Palm Beach, Palm Springs, Ojai, etc., just using it as a trendy location to push their online sales? Because most of this, like the store that I've been looking at, has nothing to do with Ojai. So I think it's important that we're bringing this up now during the general plan update to keep our small town aesthetics. That's why people want to use Ojai as a marketing tool and say that they have a base here or an orchard here, or, that they're getting their fruit from here. So I think that it's really important to look at that as collective marketing is just a way of them, for a large business to use an online presence or a physical location to push their online presence. And then also, if a business starts in Ojai and becomes a franchise, we could possibly allow some exemptions, even though I doubt really that in the 4 square miles of our town, we would need a whole lot of locations, no matter how tasty our kombucha or, whatever tea is, So I just really appreciate what you guys are doing, because every day in my business, which I've had for 20 years, people come in and they're just like, they love the quirky small town uniqueness that is Ojai, and the fact that they're not just seeing a bunch of corporate names that they see online or in Vogue magazine. So I really appreciate you taking, a forward move on this. And I think the collective marketing is very important, that you're tying that in because of the internet sales and such. So thank you. Appreciate all your work.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else who wishes to speak on item 3? All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing.
Chair Quillisi,
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you wanted to mention the 4 emails that we received. And just so you know, Bianca Rowe has emailed me literally 6 times during this meeting. She's out of the country, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning where she's at, and she's just really wants you to know that she's tried to get on the meeting.
Right.
And then we have Jamie Fleming from Chamber of Commerce,
Right.
Ojai Valley Chamber of Commerce, Linda Garrett, and Michael Graves, who had commented at the May meeting, and he also included those comments again this evening. So I just
Right.
wanted to have their names on the record.
Thank you, Sherry.
Hard copies of all those have been provided to the commissioners, or soft copies by email from you.
But thanks for
but
mentioning
yes.
it. Yeah,
Put it on the
yeah,
record.
thank you. Thank
Very
you so
good.
much, Sherry.
Just one item of clarity, Nikhil. If someone had a business, started a business here in Ojai, and then franchised it worldwide, but there was still only one instance of it in Ojai, is it a formula business?
Well, if they got their, so if the business existed in Ojai, and then they went out and franchised it later, it would likely become a formula business, but as Matt noted, it's illegal non-conforming at this point. So they couldn't probably open a second business. And then just on that point, I want to clarify 2 points that were made by in public comment. And one was on the definition of collective marketing. I know that the question was whether it opens us up to legal challenge. And on that, I would note 2 points. First, speaking in terms of how courts interpret definitions, the deference is given to the agency doing the interpretation. We, as the agency, our interpretation of what collective marketing is what controls. Unless we define it arbitrarily and capriciously, we have deference with respect to that of how we treat terms in our code. As long as we don't say basically change the definition every time, as long as we have a consistent way of interpreting it, that's how we do it. And then the second thing is on the actual definition of perhaps tightening up the definition. One point I would note is that oftentimes definitions are written broadly to give staff and the city more flexibility. And so tightening up or further defining something may limit staff's ability to address another issue. And so giving it a broader definition gives the staff the flexibility to address each business on its own merits. And so I would say that. And then the second point, the third point, I guess, is on the issue of landlords. Again, I would note that the city's power applies to land use. And so the city can, for example, prohibit landlords from leasing to a business that's a prohibited business in the city, because it would be creating a nuisance. For example, if the city prohibited adult establishments, the city could, for example, prohibit landlords from leasing to adult establishments. However, on its face, a business is only prohibited if it meets one of the criteria. If it goes in for a business is only considered a formula business if it meets two of the criteria. And so at that point of the leasing stage, it doesn't meet two of those criteria because it hasn't applied for a permit yet. And so our power is likely constrained with respect to, I mean, again, I don't know the specifics of how we would do this, but as a word of caution, our power to regulate landlords and their ability to rent to businesses that maybe, perhaps potentially may be a formula business is constrained by that point.
Okay. Okay. Let's go around the commission. Vice Chair Nolan, your thoughts on the issue?
Chair Quilisi,
I'm
have
sorry,
we closed? Just a reminder, I think public comment is still open. Have we officially closed public
I
comment?
think I closed the
Did you
public
close
hearing.
it? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Vice Chair Nolan, your thoughts? I think you must be muted.
Yes, I was muted. Thank you for catching that. I wanted to, first of all, thank staff for the thorough job that they have done. And I think most of my questions got answered. I did hear the public comment, and I would say, to go through it one more time, in other words, I think where I'm coming from is recommends to go forward to city council, but also do a once through again if any of the language potentially could get cleaned up or clarified a little bit. It may be fine, but it's always good to just go through it again because I know we had questions as well. So I think that's where I'm at the moment.
Okay. Commissioner Lawes?
Yeah, so council looked at this, let's see, June 22nd. So, I just cannot get over the gut feeling that this is way too hastily done. I totally give kudos to staff, anybody who worked on this, and the heroic effort that you've made. But this is a complicated issue. We are doing something brand new, and I don't think we've sought out the expertise really that we probably should in terms of vetting this. And I think there are even broader issues to really consider. So basically what I'm saying is, and this is not our purview tonight, but I think that the council has unrealistic expectations to expect this to be accomplished within 45 days. And an issue like this that is complicated deserves the time that it needs to be hashed out, discussed thoroughly with representatives from the business community, the residential community, planning and legal experts. And I really don't like to see a hasty job at this. I think we're going to make mistakes. I think there's larger issues, such as, okay, we're requiring CUPs in the downtown. What about the rest of the commercial area? Why aren't we applying CUPs with the standards of the frontage, and maybe the square footage in the frontage is also not appropriate? I don't know. We're not talking about any of this. We also don't have any mention of a required period of review for CUPs. So if we did happen to issue a CUP for a formula business, we haven't talked at all about how often are we going to review them? Every 2 years, every 5 years? To make sure that they're not expanding
Within the city?
Elsewhere. They're not creating, these other outlets outside the city that change the volume of business that they're doing. And maybe we want to do something differently with the CUP. Some comments were made about the collective marketing definition, and I agree, broad is good, but I just am very concerned about this not being sufficiently vetted in the 2-week period to develop this. It's not, it's not a wise choice to just slam stuff through the city. Where there is no downside to continuing the moratorium and allowing more thought, more input, more vetting. And for another example is on these exemptions. So we exempt automated standalone vending machines. Well, we don't have any. How many vending machines? Like if we have 4 in a row, is that okay? I don't know. So I just think we need some more time on this. I would like personally to see the moratorium extended. We just don't have a lot of experience with the formula business. I worked in a city, Laguna Beach, where it's a tourist town highly impacted by tourists that were impacting the character of the community way back in the 80s. And as far back then. And in the early 90s, they established a citizens committee that had representation from the business community, residents, the staff, and others. And it was a multi-year effort that they hashed this process through. And in the end, their solution, which I'm just saying that's their solution, was to develop a downtown-specific plan that was largely oriented to dealing with the formula businesses and the impact. And it has made a difference, because all you have to do is go to communities, other communities, such as La Jolla. It is chain store from one end of the city to the other. And and Ojai could be just like that. It could be, I mean, if we're not careful, and somebody came up here and said that, I mean, this is a big surprise. We thought it was the retail, the food industry, and now, bang, the whole character of the problem has changed, and it's something all new, and it's the retail business that we really need to protect because, again, as somebody said who came up to the mic, it would not take long, it might not take long, if we don't do this right, the character of Ojai could change substantially in ways that we don't want to see it changed. And I, for one, I want to do what we need to do in a way that is appropriate to protect Ojai and the character of Ojai, and I don't want to see it destroyed. And so I'm not ready to go forward with this. I think there's more that we need to think about.
Okay. You made mention of the CUPs. If you look at Exhibit 1, page 2, and Section 2B1, it says, a formula business as defined in subsection D has to get a CUP.
Right, but what I'm saying is there's a bigger issue here at stake. That's in the downtown.
No.
It's all,
this-
it's citywide.
This is anywhere.
Yes, that's correct. If I
Any
could jump in there.
Okay, you're right,
That is
you're right.
absolutely correct.
You're right.
Only B5
Thanks for
applies
the
to downtown.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
clarification, yes,
Correct. CUP is required throughout the
There are
city
other-
for formula business.
right.
It's only a matter of that additional trigger for the numeric linear footage and square footage size components as to the downtown commercial area. But a CUP is required for any formula business that meets the definition throughout.
But the
city.
question is, would it be a good idea to apply all of these to all of the commercial businesses in the downtown? And maybe we need to go farther and require CUPs for all commercial businesses. And
That's the
that, I'll
question
tell you
that
something,
the commission
that'll
can
nip
consider.
things in the bud really quick. So, it's a planning tool that hasn't even been talked about in addressing this problem. So, I just think, I'm not ready to go forward. I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about, larger issues that apply to all of the commercial businesses in Ojai. And I'm all for protecting the character of Ojai. I just, let's use the tools that we have available. But thank you. Thanks for your work. I think that there's good thinking here, and I really appreciate it. And I'm not, I don't like the hastiness that was driven by the city council. In fact, they're not even meeting this month. They took a vacation, and we're rushing this thing through. So I'm not in favor of that.
Okay. Commissioner Trent, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with the other commissioners. I think we need to. I don't think there's anything that would hurt in taking a pause and maybe extending the moratorium a little bit, giving us some more time to evaluate this and potentially bring in some additional voices to clean up the language. I mean, this is a critical part of Ojai. It's part of the identity of the town. It's a competitive advantage in our fight for tourist dollars, with other cities. It's one of the reasons people love coming here. So we need to do whatever we can to protect that. And I agree that there are ways to get around these particular guidelines, if somebody's creative enough. So I think that we need to look at those and see what other types of, what other loopholes we might be able to close. And I think having a little bit more time, getting a little bit more input, I don't think it could hurt.
Okay, thank you. One of the speakers tonight mentioned San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which of course is a collection of independent cities. I'm not sure if there's anything in formula business ordinances in those that you have not already seen in terms of the new definition of collective marketing that you've developed. if those are things that you have not looked at, I think it's worth looking at. One other clarification I would like to get on the record. We have, as I understand the plain language of the existing and the proposed ordinance, there's a great deal of effort that's gone into establishing what is and what is by exclusion not a formula business. But only one type of formula business is not allowed in the city, and that is one that, I'll paraphrase, is in the fast food business. No other formula business of any sort is not allowed to exist here. It has the additional hurdle of getting a CUP as opposed to a regular business license, but I don't see any other restrictions. Am I reading that correctly?
So, in terms of, and I think it's the first piece to this ordinance as it exists currently, really speaks to the fast food industry you're talking about. But it's more than just that. It's every business that we look at, with the exception of any exceptions that have been identified, which currently is only well, let's just take a look. The standalone vending machines. Those have been identified as being expressly exempt as the ordinance currently exists.
Right, and none of those things that are now proposed as exemptions fell into the prior or the new definition of a banned formula business, of a formula business where the city would not process or grant a business permit, correct?
Correct.
So I'm not sure what adding those exemptions actually does, because it has no practical difference. These are formula businesses, they need to get a CUP, but they're not banned.
They're not banned, they've got to go through a discretionary review process. The CUP allows for that.
Every CUP is a
Correct.
discretionary
Through the findings
process,
within,
right.
yeah, through the findings within the article for CUPs, as well as the findings that have been identified within the formula business. So there's really kind of two layers of findings that any applicant that falls within the bucket of a CUP as a requirement
Okay,
would have to go
yeah,
through.
with collective marketing and standardized signage, you could ban all the gas stations if you didn't make an exception, for example.
Correct.
Or the banks.
Correct.
Okay.
So here and I would have to say that in looking at other, and I would say the vast majority of the jurisdictions that I was looking at in terms of the research, the vast majority of them have exemptions. I would say the identification of these exemptions as proposed is probably the thinnest that I've seen.
Okay. So did you, in fact, in your survey of other jurisdictions, did you include San Francisco in that?
No. Based on its size, I ignored San Francisco.
Okay.
But I can take a closer look at San Francisco,
Yeah.
if that is what the commission
And
wants.
the cities in Silicon Valley, I'd say Menlo Park, Burlingame, Redwood City, Palo Alto, Mountain View, Cupertino, Santa Clara, maybe San Jose.
And I think what was interesting is if you look at a lot of the cities that were included, the four that were kind of highlighted within the staff report itself, similar in size, similar in terms of the type and quality, historic downtown district or not. There were a lot of key factors that went into looking at each of those cities. 3 of the 4 are within the state's boundaries. 1 is not. But I can just tell you right now, the formula business is not just strictly within California. It is within the lower 48.
I mean, we could take a look at Carmel and Laguna Beach. They may,
Carmel by the Sea has a formula business ordinance, yes.
yeah, right. Laguna Beach does too. Again, I'm not sure if they've been to the point where they're feeling like they need to deal with the retail end of things. I know for sure they've dealt with the food
Restaurants,
End
it's
of
definitely
it.
very clear
But
within
I don't
those.
know where they stand on the retail, so.
Okay, any other thoughts from commissioners? And what do you think we should do going forward at this point, then? Should we should we approve what's proposed and give additional direction to staff to go look at other things? Should we recommend to city council that we not go forward with this draft of the proposed ordinance changes? Or is there some third way that we should be looking at? Vice Chair Nolan, your thoughts?
I think we have a really good foundation here. Once again, thank you to staff. But I would be interested in maybe doing a little more exploration. And it's really only just to find out what some other communities, in addition to the ones we've already looked at, may have done, just to give us that time and to make sure we're doing this really thorough. So it's just additional information that we could possibly pull from if we needed to tighten this up, or even just for further clarification. So I guess that would have been your number one option was, do we need more information? And I'm saying yes.
So you would prefer not to recommend
Moving
the
it forward.
proposed ordinance in its current form, but
Yeah,
to
so-
direct staff to look into some more items?
I would, like them to look into more items, and in which case they may have to extend the moratorium. But I think, like I said, we have a good foundation, a really, really good start. So I can't imagine that it's going to, take a lot longer. But I think having a little bit of extra time to make sure we're really thorough is important.
Regarding the moratorium, I recall from the last city council meeting that they were going, if they wished to extend the 45-day moratorium, they were going to have to do that in a special meeting prior to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting anyway.
Yeah, I think I just brought it up because I do know, apparently are they completely off for the month of July, or at least for a couple of weeks, apparently. I mean, they may or may not have to do it, but if needed, I would say extend it if we need a little extra time.
So I want to jump in here on this one if I can. Thank you, Vice Chair Nolan and Chair Quillisi. The council will be considering extending the moratorium at their special meeting scheduled for Tuesday, August 3rd of this year. The moratorium expires by state law if not extended on Friday, August 6th. So if the intention is to do anything with this, an extension will be required. But that, of course, is a legislative choice up to the city council, requiring a 4/5 vote of the council. And that extension will be considered at a notice public hearing on August 3rd, a special meeting. And then from there, it'll come, if extended, then any recommendations that come from this commission for changes to the ordinance that either as drafted now or as will be further revised would come to council either the August 10th meeting or the August 22nd meeting. August 24th meeting. And I'm not yet sure which of those two meetings it will come back to. That timing will be up to the mayor and the city manager. So at this point, what I'm hearing is a developing consensus regarding recommending that the council extend the moratorium to provide more time for these discussions and tweaks to the ordinance, and then further review by this commission. Your next meeting is in 2 weeks on the 21st. Is that the request?
Well, that was going to be my next comment, because we, if I remember correctly, have canceled the 21st, and we're doing a special meeting on, what is it, the week before? Isn't it like the 12th or the 14th?
14th.
And I'm not sure that we would have time. So my next comment was going to be to ask Lucas staff if, what seemed reasonable based on that timing, and then, of course, the timing with the city council and other agenda items.
Is our meeting canceled on the 21st?
Yeah, so
Oh, I didn't
the
realize.
meeting for the 21st is canceled. We do have a special meeting a week from today.
Right.
That will be discussing exclusively the housing element in terms of its draft revisions.
Page addendum.
If I was looking at the calendar, I would probably say it would be the second meeting in, depending on what the commission is looking for in terms of direction for staff to go back and kind of go back to the drawing board. It would be either the first or the second meeting in August is what I would be looking at.
Okay.
The 4th or the 18th. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Trench, your thoughts?
I mean, I agree. I think we need to move to look for an extension. I mean, I think just, getting some more time on this would be good.
Okay, of course, an extension of the moratorium is not within the purview of the commission in any case. It's sort of,
No, but-
our choices, I think, are, one, to recommend the proposed ordinance as written, as presented to us with, so far as I know, only one amendment, and that was the code call-out on page 2. That would be one choice. A second choice would be to vote not to recommend the proposed ordinance as presented and as amended, and to ask staff to look into additional items to flesh out the analysis. I'm still not sure if there's a third thing that's within our purview, because the moratorium is not. If we decided not to recommend this to go forward tonight, as written or as amended, then it would be up to council whether they wanted to extend the moratorium. That's their choice anyway.
So the implication of if we continued it to a meeting in August would be that the moratorium might expire.
The moratorium might expire in any
Yes.
case, right?
And what was the vote of council on the moratorium?
That was 4-1, I believe, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes,
I'll
I believe it was
double check
4-1.
this, but I believe that was correct, 4-1.
Can we make a recommendation to have them extended? Is that something within our purview?
Yes.
Yeah, so we could move to not recommend the ordinance as presented and recommend to the council extension of the moratorium. Just leave it at that.
And, well, I think we need to go farther than that and give staff some direction as to what we want to see done before it is in a form that we would recommend approval. And all I can think of right now that's been mentioned is looking at Silicon Valley, whatever that means, and looking at San Francisco, and see if there is some verbiage in there that staff would like to bring forward and recommend to the commission.
Well, I would like to see some, a little more consultation or something, and maybe a citizens committee could do a little bit of the homework. I'd be willing to serve on that, and maybe Kathy or.
If you did, you might have to recuse yourself when the issue came
To do
back before the commission.
No,
At
I
this
don't
time,
think
my
so.
recommendation would be any commissioner who wants to take a look at these issues is very welcome to do so, and staff will be very happy to take the time. This is a legislative matter, so recusal wouldn't be required,
Thank you.
having taken a look at the issue outside of the meeting, because it's legislative, setting generally applicable policy. However, we have no authorization as a staff from council
Understood.
who would have to make such authorization to do anything with a citizens committee. So
Understood.
I would shy away from that option and instead recommend simply any research that commissioners wanted to do. Is we very much welcome we'll take a look at the cities that have been cited, the half dozen or so. We'll add them to the list of ordinances we took a look at. Of course, that a number is noted in the staff report. We'll take a look at those. To my knowledge, no city has yet tried to tackle this collective online and offline component. So we are in uncharted waters, but we'll happy to see if somebody else has gone ahead of us, and we'll double check that component. And then as to the request with respect to Silicon Valley, I understand the request is more or less to tighten up the definition, the reference to online marketing or internet marketing with the kind of terminology that the internet industry uses. And I would take a look at that, looking at the approaches used in the formula business ordinances in places like Mountain View or Burlingame. However, as Nikhil noted earlier, a court is going to give deference to the city's definition, and a broader definition gives us a greater flexibility. If we develop a narrow definition that's technologically specific, then as the technology changes, we have to continuously update our definitions. If we have a broader definition, then it's technology agnostic, and that would give us greater flexibility in dealing with applying it to projects that may come in and sort of be on the bubble. But that said, we're happy to take a look at it between now and whenever the commission next takes this up, recognizing, as Chair Quilsley noted, if the commission doesn't take this up until after August 3rd, then there is the possibility that the council will not extend the moratorium. And if that happens, that's okay. It would simply mean that we would be applying the existing ordinance as read in the code and not the moratorium ordinance to anybody who would apply for a permit in that window.
And not
Right.
this
And that choice
proposed
up to no one in this room. That'll, of course, be council's choice.
Correct.
Well, I would personally wonder if we might not be better off approving what we have in front of us as amended with that one code call out, and asking staff to consider whether additional changes should be recommended to the city council. That way, whether the city council extends the moratorium or doesn't before our next meeting, would at least have this on the record as a tighter definition. Does that make any difference? It wouldn't have been passed by the city council yet, and even on any date that it was passed, it would not take effect for 30 days unless otherwise stated, I believe.
Right, it wouldn't take effect for 30 days unless it was an urgency ordinance. So from what I understand from what you're saying, Chair Quilisi, so if this commission were to recommend the council adopt the ordinance as amended, a resolution recommended to council, that would then go to council, and then it would go to first and second reading. In the meantime, if the council chooses to adopt it, that would be the ordinance going forward. That is independent of the moratorium itself, which the council will consider on August 3rd, because it expires on August 6th. So I don't believe there is enough time, and I'll defer to Mr. Summers on this, but I don't think there's any meetings before August 3rd where the commission would have a first reading of this ordinance as amended. And so it
In
would.
fact, a week from today is the only other meeting between now and August 3rd. And
The
that's
council
a
won't be
housing
meeting on
element.
that meeting. They canceled the 2 meetings in July. So what I would expect is if the commission were to recommend adoption of the resolution with that one typo change, and further recommend additional study of the additional pieces we've been discussing, then that could go to council and in a 2-step process. As to the moratorium on August 3rd, they consider extending it or not. And then as to the ordinance, that would still come to council at either the August 10th or the August 24th meetings. And between now and then, staff would make those further, complete the research that we've been discussing. And we would bring to the council the version is recommended by the Planning Commission, plus anything else we would recommend to tighten up the definitions based on what we found, and those would together go to the council at, again, either the 10th or the 24th meeting. That's another option before the commission.
Can I
And
ask you a
if
question?
from there,
Changes would
it'd
not
be
have
up to
been
the
reviewed
council.
by the planning commission.
Correct. In this scenario, it'd go up to council, not back to this commission. And then, of course, council could send it back down or adopt it, introduce it, then adopt it, either as proposed or with further adjustments. That'd be up to council.
Well, so council couldn't possibly adopt an ordinance before they're effectively not going to have any ordinance, even if we sent this up there, they still need a first and second reading unless they do, I guess,
That's right.
are they planning to do an urgency ordinance? I don't think so.
No, our expectation is that if this went up, it would be first reading on either the 10th or the 24th, and then second reading the meeting after that.
They really would need to extend the moratorium anyway.
If the council doesn't want something to come in the meantime, that would be in the gap between the existing book ordinance and the moratorium ordinance, then they will have to extend it. That is correct.
Yeah.
But again, whether they will or will not is not up to me.
Understood.
One way to frame the question perhaps is, would the commission feel that what we have in front of us as amended is a good first step and recommend a second step? Or do we want to wait until we see the second step before recommending it to the city council? I think those are kind of the choices that we have right now. And a motion one way or the other would be useful if someone wishes to make it.
Chair Quillisi?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a question on the two options you just mentioned. I'm understanding you correctly. The option is, we ask for additional information, it goes directly to city council, or we ask for more information and it comes to the commission, for planning commission first. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, ma'am. Either would you want to send it to city council now, or would you want
As
to wait
is.
until there's more work done before deciding what to send to city council?
Yeah, I think I'd like it to come back to us if it could.
I'm in agreement with that.
Commissioner
So-
Trent.
And since they're not going to have an ordinance anyway to adopt until after they're back in session.
The existing ordinance would be in play, as
Yeah,
Mr. Sommer said.
yeah.
It's not going to be,
Yeah, it just doesn't
One
include
point.
collective marketing.
nor does it include the number 5 for the magic number for the amount of businesses. So it would just be our existing ordinance until it got resolved, or if they decide, which is their choice, to extend the moratorium.
I don't have the existing ordinance from the website right now, but I noticed that D2, this is on page 3 of Exhibit 1, is all underlined. But is that all new text? And if so, did you renumber the things that came after? It
Yes,
looks
it
like
is-
you
it
did
is-
when you added collective marketing.
Yes, standard menu is new
Oh, yeah.
text, a new term.
Okay, so trademark used to be 2.
Oh, in terms of the renumbering, yes.
In terms of the text of the ordinance.
Correct.
So that was added.
Oh, goodness.
Okay.
Shoot, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah.
All right, so what's the pleasure of the commission? Do we send forward what we have and then look at something as a second step? Or do we wait for the second step to be completed before we recommend something to council?
All right, I'll make a motion.
Okay?
I'll make a motion that the ordinance come back to planning commission with some updated information. And at that point, we determine, if we're going to recommend it and move it forward to council.
Okay?
What was the last part?
Date to be determined.
And then
Oh, okay,
we'll
okay.
review whatever comes back after the the additional analysis.
Okay.
Correct.
And can we, council, are we allowed to make a recommendation to council to extend the moratorium? Just as a separate,
That's-
I mean, part of the motion?
We don't
or-
send them something right now, they'll do it.
Right, you can, as a separate motion, there's nothing stopping you from us making a motion to recommend to council that they adopt the moratorium, or extend the moratorium. But
Yeah, I can
it's
add
purely
it.
a recommendation. So
Sure.
perhaps it's entirely your discretion if you want to do two separate motions or do it within one motion.
I'll add it to the first motion, that we make the recommendation to council that they extend the moratorium, as needed, depending on the timing.
So to clarify for the commission then, the council, Commissioner Nolan's motion then is to, at this point, ask staff to go back and consider additional information as noted in the public comment and in the commissioner's own comments, and to bring back the revised formula business ordinance at a later date, as well as recommend that the city council at its August 3rd meeting consider extending the existing moratorium.
Correct.
Second,
Okay?
and thank you for restating that.
Always nice to have an attorney in
That's very nice.
in the room. Discussion of the motion. We've heard from the Vice Chair and Commissioner Lottis. How about you, Commissioner Trent?
I like that recommendation. I appreciate Commissioner Nolan outlining that and providing that context. I like the idea of making that recommendation to the Planning Commission, and yeah, we could do some more digging on this and figure out what we can find with those cities up in Northern California.
Okay. My thoughts, first of all, would start with a question of staff. At what Planning Commission meeting do you think you might come back with potentially additional changes to what we have in front of us? Would that be August 4th, or would that be August 18th?
Probably August 18th.
August 18th, okay. So if we got something back from you on August 18th, and we approved recommending that to the city council, then that's probably time enough for them to do a first reading on the 24th, and then one in...
Not exactly, if
No,
I can
yeah.
jump there. It requires 10 days notice.
10 days
So
notice,
if
okay.
if the PC took it up on the 18th,
Right. So council could take it
the,
up in their
September.
two meetings in September.
Correct.
Okay. And then it could take effect late in October sometime.
30 days after second reading.
And if we passed what's here as amended, they could take it up. Actually, the special meeting, is it a single subject? Or could they take up this if we passed it on August 3rd?
they would not take this up on August 3rd. My expectation would be that they'll take it up at either the 10th or the 22nd. The August 3rd meeting will be just two items, ATP project and the active transportation project on Ojai and Maricopa Avenues, and final direction from council on design, which will be a lengthy discussion, and extending the moratorium. It would come to council if it recommended tonight
Okay.
on the 10th or the 24th, depending on the mayor and city manager.
Essentially, we're talking about council taking up whatever we send forward to them, either in their two meetings in August or their two meetings in September. So,
Correct.
in effect, it would cost us a month to hold off approving what is in front of us right now and asking for additional analysis. All right, any more discussion? Then Sherry, let's call the roll.
Quillisi,
Yes.
Nolan,
Yes?
Lottis, Trent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you all very much. That was a stimulating discussion.
And well, worthy, worthy discussion.
All right. So we'll hear from you again late in August or mid to late August and see if there are any changes that you recommend.
I will return.
Okay?
Staff will return with something, yes.
We'll move on then to our discussion item number 4, the general plan update, general plan land use map discussion.
Yes.
And Chair Quillisi, before Lucas starts, I'm going to say my good evenings. I joined just for the formula business item. I will leave the remaining items on your agenda to the wise counsel of Mr. Domley and the able assistance of staff, leadership of staff from Mr. Siebert. With that, I will drop out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Summers. Appreciate your time here.
Certainly.
Lucas, why don't you take us through this discussion first? I have some questions. I'm sure other commissioners do too.
Sure. I may not have the answers, but certainly this is one of those where it is really a discussion. When the title here identifies it as a discussion, it is meant for a discussion. We are at the very beginning stages of this land use element, and more importantly, the land use element map, in terms of looking at certain areas within the city that have been discussed at public workshops, that have been discussed by this commission at some point when we brought this forward in the very beginning, back in October, November of 2020, have been discussed by other commissions, have been discussed by council members. There are really two areas that are kind of starting this discussion piece. The first is located within and along, Montgomery Street, sorry. And it's referred to as the general commercial zoned area. And I want to say zoned, I want to say it's a land use area, because that is really what we're talking about here tonight. It's what frames that definition that's identified within the land use element of the general plan. The other area, and there's several businesses that are highlighted within that area for discussion tonight. The other area is along Bryant Street, which is a very interesting and kind of peculiar area. Bryant, I identify as Bryant Street, but really the discussion could very well lead us to Bryant Circle as well, in terms of taking a look at that as well. So those are the two kind of areas from a land use map standpoint. If there are other areas that the commission is interested in staff taking a deeper dive into, not necessarily in terms of diving into it tonight, but kind of looking at this in a 20,000 foot level, and then kind of giving some direction tonight for staff to go back and kind of do that deeper dive and bring something back for further discussion. We're certainly open to that as well.
And to add to just Lucas's point, given the implications and the legal questions that may arise from a deeper dive, I think it would be important to remind the commission, or perhaps phrase it, and this is more of the introduction to this. And so, there will be more questions, there will be more comments that, in the same way we sort of approached, we did a far deeper dive with the housing element right then and there, because we are under a deadline to approve the housing element because it must be submitted to HCD. And so with this one, we have a bit more flexibility. We need to have this discussion and get this part of the general plan update going. However, this is probably not the right arena at this point for the deep dive, in that this is going to be introducing members of the commission to the zoning, these particular Bryant Street, North Montgomery Street, and what Lucas has identified, and then going from there. And then, because there will be, legal implications of any of the changes or any of the what we do, and so sort of like a ripple effect that'll happen. So,
and if I could even take it a little bit further, for instance, with the general commercial area off of Montgomery, I've met with that community. They've invited me in for a discussion. So they're very interested in seeing how that potentially frames. In fact, there are members here that more likely speak to that as well. The Bryant Street area has come forward through several discussions, through the workshop, through various commissions asking the question, through council members asking the question. what's the future of Bryant Street and Bryant Circle? So those are kind of the two I would say kickoff points at this point. So with that, if you have any questions, I do believe there are people here, representatives of the community to speak tonight as well.
Okay, we will at some point on a much longer schedule then, I presume, see a red line version of the land use element?
I am not making any promises for a red line. I can just tell you, in terms of doing the housing element red line, it is taking 3 times the amount of work that I had anticipated.
Well, I just noticed that the extract that you had here that starts attachment C, it's 4 pages. I keep a copy of the land use element and the housing element in a binder on my shelf just for historical purposes. It's 59 pages. And I don't know who's updating it or how, but I presume we'll see it before it goes forward to council.
Yes.
Okay,
As a recommendation, yes.
okay. Any questions for staff or attorneys on this topic?
Just a quick question. So I don't quite understand the area between Santa Ana Street and Ojai Valley Bike Trail. Is that like the Santa Ana Street that's right out here?
That's right out here.
Yep. It's a stone's throw away. That's another area that
So where's the, between what streets? Is it down to Signal or an up?
No,
to-
I wouldn't say as far as Signal. The boundaries of that one are somewhat interesting as well, because you have single family residential, and then you have to its south really public, to the east is VMU or village mixed use, to the west is multifamily, to the north is multifamily as well. So this is kind of a pocket of single family residential in terms of what we're looking at for that area as well. And if there's any other areas that the commission would like staff to look into further, we can certainly do that deeper dive.
Okay, and so did this area come up because of interest expressed by people living there?
Yes.
How did it come up?
Yeah, this isn't one where staff said, oh, this makes it. This is one that this is kind of like the SPL overlay in terms of who's interested. Kind of that same. I'm not reaching out to individuals; they're reaching out to us.
Okay.
That's really what it boils down to.
And that, and so I guess the Montgomery Street people have a letter into us. I didn't see that originally.
Yep. The Montgomery Street one has several interested parties. I would say the vast majority of the owners, and I know there is representation here.
So they're
we
interested
can take
in
public
something
comment as
more
well.
like VMU.
They're interested specifically, I think, in VMU versus C1, which makes any residence non-conforming.
Right.
Just the,
Chair Quillisi, what might be helpful is having the public. I think there are a couple members of the public that would like to speak as well.
I'd like that too. I just had a question for you because I was not understanding completely the map that you gave us. It seems to run slightly north of Oak. I walk along Oak a lot, and it seems to take a jog up to one parcel where there's a long driveway to the north and several, like 4 to 6 houses along there. That's part of what's proposed, or
Not proposed. That's what's
asked for here.
That's what's existing currently. The maps that you're seeing there, just to give some context, is what's existing currently. Nothing in terms of what is envisioned into the future.
Okay, but are all the areas that are overlaid in light red here representative of the
That
people
entire
that are
area.
asking for a change to VMU?
I want to say, if not 9 out of the 10, 10 out of the 10 business owners or property owners, I would say property owners have expressed an interest in a change.
Okay. And in the correspondence that we have gotten, I understand that that if this zoning were to change from C1 to VMU, there would be certain flexibilities that would be allowed legally as opposed to non-conforming, let's say, that are not, that are non-conforming right now.
Yeah, so
But is there a downside to a particular parcel if it goes from C1 to VMU? Is it only that there are more flexible terms? I don't want to say more entitlements necessarily, but are there any additional restrictions on a parcel other than, no, I was going to say you have to come to Planning Commission, but both C1 and VMU do have to do that now. So is
Correct.
there anything else? Is there a downside to moving a particular parcel from C1 to VMU?
I think there's pros and cons to either one. I think the pro with commercial is that you get a kind of a commercial feel, look, idea behind it, but you lose the residential piece to that. And if you look at this area, this very small general commercial area, there are residential units here that are really non-conforming by today's standards.
Right, right. If it were zoned residential, then a parcel owner could do things there without, by right, I'll say. Whereas if it's commercial or VMU, then it requires
Yep, within the
hearing, or
Yep,
at least a
within those
director's
standards.
exemption.
Yep. Yeah, and so VMU provides certainly flexibility, even in R2. I'm sorry, that's medium residential or medium high residential. Those all provide options. There could even be a hybrid that if the commission wishes, I could do a deeper dive into what that hybrid could look like and bring back some studies and some information.
Okay?
The interesting thing about doing this early on is it provides that kind of wider net of research that certainly staff can do, and then come back with discussion pieces on the findings for that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Vice Chair Nolan, please.
Yes, so just as kind of a comment and also, I guess, something that potentially could go into a deeper dive. But, I think the big thing that I'm seeing with the Montgomery Street and even with Bryant and with our housing overlay, because you see the housing overlay coming in potentially on Bryant Street, and within our commercial and other zone or land use areas. I think the big thing is, the shortage of housing and how can we expand our housing and at the same time maintain, have our commercial district, have our manufacturing. But one thing that I would like to see explored would be the possibility of whether it would be converted to VMU or some other subset of commercial, the ability to add housing to the commercial. So in other words, if an undeveloped property, we don't have a lot of that, but we do have some, could have housing upstairs and the commercial down below, would we end up calling that VMU? I don't know. Or is it commercial with some kind of an overlay? But I think having the ability to have that flexibility is a smart thing. And we know that housing is an issue. We know there's a lack of housing. And the fact that you can have more live-work opportunities, you're actually cutting down potentially on traffic and parking and air pollution as well. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
I would remind the commission that when we looked at vision and goals, or vision and guiding principles for the general plan update, we did include a recommendation to add language about being more flexible about
Right.
housing in the commercial zone, in the C1 zone. And in fact, when we passed the list of SPL overlay sites, some of those are in the C1 zone,
Correct.
and that by implication says that we think there ought to be more opportunity for housing in the commercial zone. Whether that means that we ought to eventually recommend changing the whole C1 zone to VMU, or just parts of it, or just parts of it to something different but more flexible than C1, is something that I think we're all going to have to think about.
Correct.
Any more questions for staff or the city attorney? All right, then let's open the proceedings for public comment. We have one card here. Don Campbell, if you'd like to come forward, you have nominally 3 minutes, but you can see how flexible we are on that.
Well, it's been a long night, so I'll kind of go towards brevity. Yeah, Don Campbell.
And the lights, you understand the lights? I should have explained that earlier because we had a lot of first-time speakers. When it hits
gets to
red,
a
you've
red
hit your
light,
3 minutes.
I'm out of here, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyhow, I own a property at 302 North Montgomery. We're talking
Okay.
about this area before. And I'm here tonight representing about 8 of the property, I think 11 property owners that we've been in contact. And they all wish to change their C1 designation to VMU or some viable hybrid of that too, that makes it easier for us. And in order to do it briefly, maybe I'll just read the letter. I have a signed letter here, signed by 8 of the 11 property owners on that block. And so I'll just turn that into you after I'm done. So we, the undersigned property owners on the block North Montgomery Street from Aliso to Oak Street, would like to formally request that our zoning be adjusted during this current general plan update from commercial C1 to village mixed use. It is one short block consisting of 11 properties. 8 of us would like to see the change, including 4 businesses and the Hotel Sunido Inn. These properties did not, 3 properties did not respond. They are rental houses and not owner occupied. The consultants for the GPU thought we were already VMU. We are surrounded by VMU even on the contiguous block. With the need for housing in Ojai, the C1 zoning limits our options. And then it speaks of me. Don Campbell has been unable to rent his former offices for over a year because people want to have a live-work situation there, okay? And especially during the COVID restrictions, we were only allowed to be business rentals with no other living premises, okay? 2 of us, she goes on to say that 2 of them are living in behind their businesses as legal non-conforming, but cannot sell it that way or refinance or add an ADU. If we move, you lose the housing, you lose the living situation. Please consider this zoning change so we can be consistent with our neighborhood and continue to live and do business in Ojai. And it's signed by 8 of the owners on that block. Okay, so I
Okay.
can just turn that in. Should I turn it into you, Sherry?
I think we've seen that, Sherry, haven't we? Yeah, okay. If you'll, hold on just a minute, Mr. Campbell.
Okay.
Back to this map. You said between Aliso and Oak.
Right.
And this overlay that we have here shows property north of Oak.
Yeah, it's north of Oak.
Is that included in your 11 parcels?
No, I think our 11 are just from, basically from Aliso north to maybe Oak Street. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but yeah.
Well, I can count an even dozen.
Okay, well, one of them
Oh,
is
no, wait a
already
minute. This
VMU, I
duplex
believe,
and-
right?
Okay, 314, 316 North Montgomery, it's a little confusing to me.
Yeah.
It shows both north and south of Oak, so I'm not sure what that is. All right.
Yeah, Chair Quillisi, if you look at the zoning map, it's that property in particular is zoned as commercial. So I think that's why it was included in this map overall.
The property north of Oak?
Yeah,
314, 316.
yeah. It's considered commercial general, and so that was included in the overall discussion because, yeah, might not make sense to just have it on an island out there by itself.
There is Montgomery. I see. Yeah, the colors on the land use map are hard for me to interpret. Okay. I thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, unless you have additional things you wanted to say to us.
No, I think the general comment too is that we need more living spaces in Ojai. People can afford to live and to work in Ojai, and I think that consideration is essentially important, especially as we redesign our housing element here and have to meet those criteria. So I appreciate you listening and hope to go. And thanks for Lucas. We worked with him, and he was very helpful to help us to
Good man.
that. So I appreciate it.
By the way, you need to change your voicemail greeting to say director now.
Chair,
So,
Chair, we do have 3 more speakers.
oh, we do? Okay. Well, let's bring them up then.
So-
These are remote speakers
This
or?
is Meg Goodwin.
Okay.
So she can go. Go ahead, Meg.
Oh, hi, thanks, Sherry. Yes, Meg Goodwin, 304 North Montgomery. I just wanted to clarify that it's just that our block, the confusion is that Tipple and Ramble is village mixed use, and it's on North Oak Street. North Montgomery at Oak Street, and we're all part of the same block. So I just think the commercial designation is just a little restrictive, and it's only our 11 properties. So again, we just want to be more fitting with the neighborhood. And, I'd prefer to see the small homes that are there become more of a village mixed use office live work situation. But definitely for those of us that do live and work there, would be better to be village mixed use. And thank you for your time with this, you guys. All of you, Lucas and the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now we have Marshall Hines.
Mr. Hines, please.
Hi there, commissioners and chairman. So my brother TJ and I are both on this call, and we had sort of gamed out who was going to talk in what order. So I don't want to mess up your meeting too much, but I'm wondering if it would be all right if TJ Thine went first, and then I will be available for questions if you guys have any.
Of course, TJ, you're on. Just unmute. There you go, TJ.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, commissioners, and city staff, thank you so much for having us here tonight. As you just heard, my name is TJ Thine, and my brother, Marshall Hines, who you just heard from him, is also on this Zoom meeting. Marshall and I first visited with our family some 27 years ago, and we fell in love with Ojai and spent several years after trying to find some property to call our own. And in 2008, we purchased a wonderful little spot just down the street from City Hall at 305 South Ventura. Now, since then, we found that we're simply not able to create the kind of community-centered place that we envision here. So we're really excited to be a part of this discussion and looking forward to help guide some thoughtful change in this lower part of Ojai, and hope that you might consider this lower part of Old Ojai in this land use revision project. I believe you already have some materials we submitted. It's quite brief, so I'd just like to take a moment and read it to you. And then we're happy to hear feedback, answer questions, or just discuss good ideas for Lower Ojai and 305 South Ventura. At 305 South Ventura, our family imagines a small, open-air neighborhood gathering place where you might stop by for a cup of coffee or a taco or an ice cream cone and enjoy the fresh air. We can see something like an outdoor yoga class using part of the space one day and a movie under the stars the next. In the fall, we could have a pumpkin patch and a place for your family to sit and carve a jack-o'-lantern. And a couple of months later, you can swing by to get your Christmas tree and a cup of hot cocoa. The idea would be that our space could change to meet the needs and interests of the community. To be specific, our property is nestled between the Westridge Market, the library, a bank, a church, the bike trail, City Hall, the police department, pickleball courts, and the community gardens. The property is also surrounded by some of the cutest homes in Ojai, making our part of town already a mix of different but compatible uses. More broadly, this lower part of Old Ojai, which feels like a cohesive neighborhood on its own, it sits just below the busiest part of Ojai Avenue. So we see this area as needing to adapt to allow the kinds of small businesses and community opportunities that fit somewhere between residences only and the high intensity development along the arcade. My brother Marshall and I want to thank you for the time to discuss all of this, and we hope that this gives you kind of an idea of what we're thinking about here at 305 South Ventura and in Lower Ojai. And if you have questions or thoughts, again, Marshall's here to answer those now.
No, I think I at least kind of understand the ask here. I would ask of staff and the city attorney, what sort of avenues, what sort of recommendations, if any, are within our purview to do at this point. We don't have any written document to vote up or down.
Yeah, there is no recommendation for tonight. It's purely a discussion.
Okay.
To kick off that discussion, to continue the discussion to another meeting, to provide for feedback from the commission for staff to go back and look at either something within these areas, looking at potential general plan land use changes or research on various areas. It's at the disposal of the commission in terms of what you're looking for, what you're thinking, and we're looking for some guidance here.
And just as I kind of mentioned before, the purpose is kind of, I mean, this may not be something that you think of today, or you get feedback from some member of the community or something that comes up later, but it's part of it is that, you know, areas where the description of the land can be adjusted, use types expanded, changes in density, that sort of thing, is what, you know, staff is looking for feedback on. And so this is kind of the first step. And so I think this is, I guess, planting the seed of this. And then this will come, I mean, at some point this will come back, the land use element will come back in for your approval, but rather than having it appear just in front of you, the staff is starting this discussion.
One of 50 things in the land use element.
Exactly, right.
Sure.
Chair Quillisi?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
If this is a good time, if I'm understanding Mr. Thine, and please correct me, or maybe I'm asking the question of Mr. Hines, I think, who's going to be answering the questions. It sounds like you possibly are looking for maybe, like, for instance, a VMU designation for this neighborhood on the south side of Ojai Avenue, where potentially you could then, it sounded like, conduct businesses from some of the properties. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, ma'am. I think that that's part of it. I mean, you know, we came at this kind of broadly. You know, we have this property at 305 South Ventura, of course, but we love our neighborhood. You know, I mean, it's just a fantastic part of town. And, you know, the village mixed use zoning district, and I apologize in advance because I wouldn't consider either of us experts here, but the village mixed use zoning district, if you were to say just blanket rezone this area that way, I certainly don't think it would harm the neighborhood. But the truth of the matter is our reading of the VMU would actually probably still not allow the sorts of things that we are talking about, which is a really low intensity, neighborhood scaled kind of commercial uses that really fit comfortably between residences, right? This is very different than the commercial development that you would see in C1, but VMU doesn't seem to us to provide that capacity. Right. So I guess just generally speaking, what we're saying is that we think maybe there's something else there in between which is not available yet.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for coming forward, because I'm very interested in what you're proposing potentially. And I do want to say that in the past, it wasn't adopted, but the city was looking at neighborhood planning. And part of that was, potentially expanding beyond our existing code with some potential new uses, similar to what you're saying. So now you're starting to get an identity in a neighborhood, and you're getting a little more cohesiveness between the neighbors, which I think is a good thing. So I personally, as a planning commissioner, would be interested. Of course, we'd have to talk to staff and city council, et cetera, but potentially coming up with some, whether it's an overlay or it's a new definition or a subset on a zoning, to allow for some creativity within that zone. So once again, I hear what you're saying about the VMU. Like, it may be a good thing, but what you're talking about is even beyond that. And I know we're not going completely into it tonight. This is a general discussion, but I would say personally, I'm very intrigued. I'm always intrigued with things like this because I think it's actually a betterment for a community. There's eyes on the street. There's, bonding. It's just, generally a good thing. So I guess I'll leave it at that, but I want to say thank you, and I'm definitely intrigued and definitely open.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Not that I can do anything about it right now, but.
Well, I just want to say we really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I mean, this is very fun for us. I mean, listening to everything that's been discussed tonight is absolutely fascinating. So thank you guys for all this time you're putting in.
Oh, thank you.
Do you see, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just gonna chime in real quick, just some general thoughts, not specifically on the lower Ojai property, but kind of overall in general, looking at these properties and looking at how our zoning is set up, and these almost are outliers, so to speak. It's almost like they're on the fringe of the VMU area, commercial and residential. Like, for example, the Montgomery property, or the Montgomery properties on North Montgomery, that to have those zoned as commercial, if you look at the zoning classification map, they're out there on an island. It's very strange to have that kind of subset there when everything around it is VMU. And then the lower Ojai location, that's similar, because if you look to the east, those are all VMU. And then the Bryant Street property, that's all commercial, and that probably could be looked at to do something different there. But I'm just wondering too if there's room to expand the term on village mixed use, or to broaden its definitions to make it a little bit more flexible. Because I think the ultimate goal is to provide flexibility, right, for both residential and for commercial uses, that's going to serve the community better, to provide opportunity for more housing, opportunity for a better community connection, which are all great things. So I'm just curious if we might be able to leverage that current VMU, considering we've got so many properties already under that classification, if we can maybe look to expand that definition. Just a thought.
Lucas, you said this is a discussion tonight, and I think Nikhil did as well. Does that mean that it's not a part of this discussion item to make a recommendation to council on either land use or zoning for any particular thing?
It seems a little early for that. This is really the first discussion that the commission has had.
I'm not
and
suggesting that
we're still
crisis
working
upon us.
Yeah, we're still working through the vision and guiding principles statement through council. I mean, that will help drive how those elements end up looking into the future. Just out of curiosity, what's your thought in terms of what you would potentially look at taking to council? Just curious.
Well, first of all, I'm still a little unclear, I guess, for lack of reading or something, about how zoning districts fit within land use areas. I don't think it's one-to-one, or you can't say, here's all the land uses, and then under each of them, there are certain zoning areas that appear there or appear there but nowhere else. I'm not sure how that all maps together right now. I'm a little curious about how this North Montgomery area that at least that's another area that I walk frequently, a couple times a week anyway, down Oak and then down Montgomery. It clearly at one point was a residentially zoned area. And it's not clear to me how it all became C1. I think that might be of some help to the commission. But C1 certainly, to my way of thinking right now, isn't flexible enough for the property owners in that area. But whether VMU is the right choice or something different is doing right by these parcel owners, I'm not clear what the commission might do. And so I'm not recommending that we vote to send anything in particular forward to city council. As you say, it's the first time we've looked at land use. But I think this ask on Montgomery Street may or may not involve land use. I don't know. Do both VMU and does VMU fall within general commercial, or does it fall within some other land use?
VMU is a one-to-one, meaning
What?
it's a one-to-one, meaning the zoning matches up with the land use designation. So VMU is matching up as a one-to-one. There isn't a separate zone. And actually, I don't want to get into, we're getting into the weeds here. What I'd like to do with that piece, and I know there was a couple other comments that were provided by the commission, bring that back as a discussion piece, because I think there is a lot of breadth and a lot of depth to that. And that conversation, I've had that conversation a number of times with other property owners within the city in terms of how that matches up. And it's not a conversation that you have in a couple of minutes. There's a lot to that, and especially in terms of how the zoning code and the general plan speak to each other, because really they need to. That's the only way it operates. Government code requires it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I would personally like to see some kind of a matrix that says, here's land use and here's zoning districts and which ones fall into which ones.
Yep.
I could not construct that today. I don't have enough information.
And Chair Quillisi, that's exactly what, staff will take back from this discussion to work on.
Yep.
And, at this point, a recommendation, you're right, is probably premature. We don't have a record to support any such recommendation at this point. But it is something that, staff will come back with. I mean, I think we've had a fairly good discussion here, and I think there's an introduction at this point as to this idea. Unlike, for example, with the housing element where we have a deadline and this is kind of, this is an ongoing, and there may be more business owners. This may be the first time some people in the city are aware of this process at this point. So,
Sure. Yeah. On the other hand, there's that old saw about delay is the cruelest form of denial.
This is also true.
But I recall reading in some of the correspondence that we've gotten that someone brought up the case of saying, we're here, we have a business and we have a residence, but if we attempt to sell this, we can't sell the residence part because that's not allowed in C1. I have not seen any evidence at this moment of what I might call a triggering event that would push us to make a quick decision about this. I think we need more information and make a more informed decision on this, as well as in general on land use and zoning. I just don't want the people that have parcels in this area to think that we're not taking seriously their needs just because we don't do something with it tonight.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to also mention that when I met with them, I identified that there are really kind of two paths, because I heard from the 8 or 9 business owners, property owners that were in attendance. And I said, look, you have two paths. You can either be a part of the general plan process and just know that that's, I mean, we're looking at 2023 in terms of adoption, and that's with fingers crossed. The other piece is for them to break off and to act independently and to move forward with a general plan zoning code amendment, or zoning map amendment in this case.
Zoning and land use change.
Yeah, so that
Separately, yeah.
and everybody that was in that group were certainly welcome and invited the opportunity to be a part of and sit at the table to talk through this process as we move forward. And just know that this commission asked in the very beginning, what is the planning commission's role? You're seeing it firsthand here, starting from the beginning. So just know that there's more conversations to take place. This was meant to be a discussion piece, some ideas. I've already jotted down several. And certainly we'll start piecing those together and come back in a month, 45 days, and revisit it and kind of massage that and see what it looks like.
And just to add on to that, I mean, the land use element is actually, and I think it does already, but it is supposed to say, it lays out all the general plan land use designations, and then it is supposed to explain which zoning classifications are consistent with each of those designations.
It is a roadmap.
So it does tell us, okay, if C1 commercial is out there, what zoning, or, well.
That's consistent with
It's
general
consistent with-
commercial,
yeah.
for
So-
example. Yes.
So, as a part of this, future discussion, if you know of areas where there's conflicts, or they're not really, we have inconsistencies or areas that don't make sense, then
Those are things we ought to
things we ought to
fix.
talk about, yeah.
That's a good point.
Mr. Chairman, this is Marshall Hines again. I'm so sorry to interject. I don't know if it's all right to do that. Everybody keeps saying discussion. Could I pose something to you?
Speak up.
Oh, okay. So my thought is, I find this so interesting. I mean, what I am extrapolating about these 3 areas that have been discussed tonight is that they all seem very, I guess you'd call it like transitional. Like there are uses that are kind of mixed around the edges of all of them. And what everybody seems to be talking about, the landowners up on Montgomery Street, what TJ and I are talking about, and what I've heard folks like Commissioner Trent mention tonight, is that there's this lack of flexibility in those spaces. And it feels to me, if it's possible, that a possible solution to this would be to create something like a new future land use designation that is flexible, that is inherently flexible. And if that requires new zoning districts to be created or existing zoning districts to be adapted to fit that goal of flexibility, that might be a possible solution that sort of solves everybody's problems across all 3 of these specific areas.
I would have to agree, and as I mentioned earlier, we did recommend inserting some language in the vision and guiding principles for the general plan, that there be more flexibility, at least with regard to housing, in the commercial zones, or zones. I'm not really sure. I think there's just one. But I do think that we need to talk through a lot more of this. My personal preference would be to give people as much flexibility as we can without creating chaos in the city. But I think the VMU goes a long way to doing that, but I'm not sure that it's the right answer beyond North Montgomery Street. We haven't in the area south of Ojai Avenue, south of the trail, I guess. That's what we're talking about, between Blanche and Ventura and the trail and Santa Ana. We've heard from one parcel owner tonight, but it's not the kind of consensus that I think we're finding on North Montgomery Street. So that would certainly be useful as we try to move forward, in addition to saying, what are the properties there south of the trail right now, and what would be the upside or the downside for any particular parcel owner, because I guess it's all residentially zoned except what the city owns across the street. What happens when people want to do something in those cases, if it were rezoned and had a different land use?
Absolutely. I know that I've talked to Marshall and Ty as well. They've been tasked with reaching out to those property owners.
Okay, good.
So you could very well be hearing from them in the future.
These are useful things for us to do.
Right.
Any more comments? Yes, Commissioner Trent, please.
I just had a clarifying question, and I apologize if this is, very remedial, but in the general plan, the land use elements, those are, it basically outlines the definition of what these are, right? Low density residential, medium density residential, medium high. So my question is, do we have the ability to go in and modify some of these definitions? Is that within our span of control as we update the general plan?
Just like the housing element, that's part of our job, is to recommend things to city council. Only they can change it.
Right. Okay. So that's first part of the question. The second part is looking at the actual zoning classification map, because I think that's a separate discussion. So first you outline, okay, what are all these items? What do these elements mean? And then we have to decide, where are we going to put those? How are we going to, basically play Tetris with the city of Ojai? And how are we going to put these elements in place? So I think the first part is defining these and maybe looking to modify, and then looking at where do they go? Where do they fit on the map, and where is appropriate depending on where we want to go as a city? Does that make sense? I just, again, trying to get clarity in my head.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
I worry a little bit about my inability to read the my gosh, on the city of Ojai zoning map, there must be nearly 20 different colors on that map.
Yeah,
some of them probably unavoidably similar. I find them difficult to read. It may be just my eyes.
I have the same trouble.
But I think that we need, in going through the land use element, and then I guess as a corollary to that, the zoning regulations in Title 10, because that's not part of the general plan, that we need to look at this in general, and I think put some more flexibility into land use that's allowed, and some more flexibility potentially into zoning definitions.
So if this commission recalls, in the very beginning, there were a couple different presentations that I had done. And one of those conversations and presentations, I talked about, and I know we've talked about this on more than one occasion, that the general plan is treated as a blueprint and it guides the zoning. You can't really necessarily talk about both of them at the same time without actually laying out the blueprint or casting that net that then begins to define how that zoning code gets either rewritten or redefined. So we're at the forefront of how this potentially is going to be either reworked or remain as is in certain circumstances.
And the I don't want to use the phrase general plan. The thought right now, or the contract or the construct or something for updating the general plan says over basically the next 2 years, we're going to go through several, but not all, of the elements of the general plan and update them.
Correct.
And when we get the land use element updated, then we'll go back to Title 10 and make sure that the zoning conforms to it.
Correct.
We still have, you remember, we all went through those land use tables
Right.
that sort of said what land uses correspond to which zoning districts. But they weren't these land uses, ag, OSRE, VLR, LR. They were much more specifically defined land uses. So
They have
still-
they have a symbol or
I haven't
right.
been
They
able
have,
to unlock a door with.
right, and you're starting to get into a deeper dive. But yes, we can go through that and do the deeper dive on that to unfold the differences and how it's a one-to-one in certain circumstances, but in certain circumstances the land use spans either one or two zones.
Okay, okay. Well, I think we've made a good start at discussion, but go ahead, please.
I have another comment, though. We haven't talked about Bryant Street. And I'm sure my comments won't surprise anyone because I've said it before, but I am very concerned about not protecting this area and keeping it as something with respect to manufacturing, including space for startup enterprises, such as the kinds of enterprises we've had grow up in Ojai and then move on because they can't find a space. So, turning this into a mini commercial area to me is not a good idea. It's going to diminish our existing commercial areas. It draws away. And when that kind of thing happens, a lot of times, communities suffer for it because the commercial energy wants to go there because it's a little less expensive. Maybe it's got an edgier vibe. I don't know, whatever trendy thing, but you're at risk of losing this very limited resource that we have in terms of whatever we want to call it, whether we want to change the name, whether we want to broaden it, the category of commercial manufacturing, I'm not sure. But I think that we can't lose sight of the need to really protect this area. And yeah, I know we have some outlier uses out there. Got a hotel, motel. I do question the beer tasting and tap room as being even an allowable use. I know it's out there, but I don't see it on any land use table. So, veterinary facility, to auto towing, that's fine. Anyway, that's I really feel pretty strongly about that. I know it was interesting because at the workshop we had on the general plan, and we did have a number of younger participants, which was great. And a lot of them were talking about, making this more, good vibe area with the commercial and the tasting room idea, this kind of thing, entertainment. So I know the interest is out there. I just want to make sure that as a part of our thinking and our discussion that we just keep the idea of the importance. If we want to have businesses that create jobs, good jobs, I think we're talking more about the entrepreneurial spirit in Ojai and the creation of new companies out there.
Hmm?
So
We don't want, I think, to redefine commercial manufacturing, or for that matter, manufacturing plan development in a way that would exclude any of those kinds of businesses.
Oh, the startups,
The
you mean?
entrepreneurial
Yeah, agreed.
manufacturing.
Oh, yeah, no, I think we'd want
I
to
worked, I
encourage.
helped run a little company with 150 people that did straight manufacturing.
Yeah. No, I'd like to encourage it, and, you know, when we get to policies, that's where we can talk about the things that should be happening in terms of changes to the actual zoning that actually regulates the specific uses. So, where we need to see those kinds of broadening or tightening or whatever, yeah, that's all to come, so.
Perhaps, Lucas, you could give us 25 words on how is the commercial manufacturing district different from manufacturing planning, it's planned development, I think, where you would have a planned development program or something. I think that's a phrase in the code somewhere.
Do we even have any of that?
It's right at it's
Yeah.
right there at the bottom, yeah. It's basically the Bryant Circle stuff.
Designation?
The Bryant Circle stuff is a different zone.
Let me see.
From Bryant Street in the main. But I'm not sure.
Stay away from using zone and use more land use.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Well, commercial
so-
manufacturing and manufacturing plan development,
we do
they're not
have-
both land uses?
Yes.
Land use class
So
designations. Yeah.
the spine, which is Bryant Street, is commercial manufacturing.
Right.
And then beyond that, now mind you, I didn't include Bryant Circle, but after I sent this out, I started thinking to myself, I probably should have. So just know that in the future, that discussion will include Bryant
that's
Circle,
good.
which does include the manufacturing plan development that we're also
Agreed.
looking
They're
at as
different
well.
colors on the land use map.
Yep.
It's not clear to me what the practical differences are there.
In terms of commercial manufacturing, so as you're entering along Bryant Street, this is kind of the vision that I see here as it's written. It has the flexibility of commercial and the manufacturing, right? In terms of light manufacturing, some sort of commercial components that interact and play appropriately. Where the further into that kind of industrial area, that planned manufacturing area, where you see more of the larger buildings, maybe broken down, or even the larger spaces. When you go down Bryant Street, you don't necessarily see huge industrial, but you see smaller, more mom and pop shop types of uses, right? Manufacturing or some sort of commercial combination.
Or services of some sort.
Or service, exactly. That's identified within this map. As you go into the circle, you start seeing larger buildings, maybe some more uses that have larger employment base. So it's kind of tucked into that area itself.
But not necessarily different businesses per se, but it may be a matter of scale.
I think scale is probably the biggest piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big office building down there in the middle
Yeah.
of the circle.
Right. And I didn't even realize we actually had the
MPD.
MPD. I knew it existed, I just didn't realize it was actually.
We're all learning as we go along here, right?
Amazing what you
Expand.
find out when you start looking at these little maps.
Well, I think we've made a good start on the topic. Any final comments from commissioners? All right, you feel like you got enough of our thoughts for the moment? Let's move on to item 5, director decisions. And I had a couple of questions on the tree permits, but any other commissioners have any questions on any of the director decisions? Well, I'll do mine. The 2 tree permits, the first one on Palomar Road, it just says remove a coast live oak. Is it diseased or dangerous or hazardous, excuse me, I think is the word? Do you recall what the reason for the removal was?
Trying to remember what the reason for that one was. I know that I spoke with Maria Delgado and asked her for a replacement. It was hazardous, so anytime
was
that we're looking
hazardous,
at,
okay.
at trees like this, and it's been deemed hazardous, and I can't remember if it was diseased or...
It's 608 Palomar.
608 Palomar. But to remind the commission, anytime that they're designated as hazardous and they've provided that information, it becomes something where we can't require it. But I ask every time. And I would say 9 times out of 10, we're getting individuals that are either saying they're replacing it immediately, we can put that on here, or if they're identifying that they're going to replace it within the next year or so, it doesn't make sense to put that on here.
Also, could I just point out that we'd be happy to forward the arborist reports to you on all these, because there's a picture.
No, just.
And you can see there's a humongous hole. You see that tree?
Yes, yes.
There's a cavity. Yeah,
No, just.
that's not the one.
Just, if it had said remove one hazardous coast live oak, I wouldn't have asked the question.
yeah.
Right.
that
We
was
can
all. I was
we
just-
can clarify that
I was
language. in the
curious
future.
about that clarification.
Yep.
The other one was on 209 Palomar, and I'm just astonished. It says, work in the drip line of 57 trees to move a water meter. I didn't realize that there were any properties in the Arbolata that had as many as 57 trees on them.
No.
This is affecting
That's a-
all of them?
No, there's a large project that Casitas Water's doing, and they had an arborist report prepared for all 58 trees on
Oh, on
It was
Salomar.
several lots.
properties.
It was
And
several
each
lots.
property is going to be pulling their own permit for their water meter. And so it's a master project for Casitas.
Okay. So it's not 57 trees at 209 Palomar.
No, we didn't explain that well enough, my mistake.
We
I
can
would-
clarify that for the future.
Good. Any other questions for the director, for our newly anointed director of community development?
Oh,
And
congratulations.
congratulations on that by
you.
all means.
Yeah.
Then let's move on to item 6, future agendas. We have another meeting in a week. And this time, that Appendix D was going to be a part of it,
Oh yes, it is definitely a part of it. It is 36 lovely pages currently,
okay?
on top of the housing element. So
Is that ready to go? That red line version?
yes, you should be receiving that at the earliest tomorrow.
Very
Meaning that it'll be going out for public review
gonna-
tomorrow.
Going to take a lot more reading again, okay? Anything else that you plan on covering on the 14th?
Nope.
That'll be exhausting
No,
enough.
it's important that I've noticed that it needs to be on its own platform,
Yeah, okay.
certainly.
And then, not sure about August 4th yet, but by the 18th, you expect to be back with,
There are items that I already know that are going to be on the agenda for the 4th.
excellent,
Yes,
excellent.
definitely.
Any more questions for staff? Then, let's move on. I'm sorry.
Oh, we're not to commission reports yet. Sorry.
That's where we're going next. Commission member reports. Any commissioner have some words of wisdom or of interest for the rest of us?
Actually, what happened with what Sherry did tonight, I thought it was, a lot of times we get written communication, and it never gets acknowledged or referenced somehow. And it is like public comment. It's equivalent to public coming here and speaking at the mic. And I just thought we might think about, is there something we would want to do that would more officially recognize the letters or who they're from or how many we got or something to that effect? I just And what you did tonight, it just made me think about that, so that's all.
In some commissions or some councils where I've been present, they do not read out the letters, but they do list who the letters are from.
Okay.
So
Yeah, even, I think that would be a nice thing to do.
That would be good. That would be good. Okay. I see no member of the city council here tonight, so we don't have a liaison. Any other final words from any commissioners? All right.
Well, one quick comment,
Please,
and
go ahead.
I was just thinking about this as I don't know, just an idea, but I wanted to ask Lucas, and maybe I get the collective wisdom from the group on how I could make this proposal, but we created an exterior lighting ordinance a while back, and it's been successful, I think, in helping outline what lighting. What lighting should be provided on the outsides of homes as they go through modifications and revisions, etc. I'm curious if we could do the same sort of thing with landscaping standards and wastewater management. We have it outlined in our code, but we don't. It's more of suggestions. It's more kind of guiding principles. I'm wondering if we could make it a little bit more, put a little more meat behind it, so to speak. I think stormwater management is critically important to refill our groundwater in Ojai.
So there does exist something called it's called the MWELO. It's the Model Water Efficient Landscaping Ordinance.
Okay.
The city, I believe, has not formally adopted the MWELO. Oh, we have.
It's in the code.
It's in the code. However,
Okay.
we can always we implement it, but we can always amend or if there's a recommendation to staff to perhaps bring it back for a second look, we can do that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
To follow up with that, John, your, ideas from that generate at the commission level about things that projects or basically they're work projects. And we don't have the authority to say, oh, we're going to start work on this, or staff do this, or staff do that. So, but I think there are projects that are important to the city and we may need to look at a horizon of a year to 3 years or 5 years or something like that. But I think it would be a good idea for the commission to put on the agenda at some point and talk, so we could talk about projects that we think would be good for the council to consider and budget for, and then, decide when that work needs to be done, because, I feel the same way about the tree ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
That we really need to look at that and talk about current problems and what's happening, and maybe the tree ordinance needs work. So it's projects like that that I think would be a good idea. The commission's in a position to kind of nudge the council
Right.
in ways about projects that are important.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Just
Vice
to
Chair
comment along
Nolan,
those
please.
lines, we used to have a running.
Landscaping expert, so.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I should ask Kathy first.
Oh, no, it's okay. Chair Quilisi, I just had a comment with this conversation we're having. For quite a while, we had a running tab of, I'm just calling it a tab, but a list of, let's call them projects, or, things that the city council wanted us to look at or address. I think Title 10 was on there. In addition, we had one that was generated from the Planning Commission, which did include the tree ordinance. And in the past, I want to say probably it was about, well, I don't know, I'm guessing about 4 years ago, we did go through the landscape ordinance, and they did do some updates. But I agree that it's something that needs to happen probably again, because our climate's changing, the water issues are getting more intense, and we keep seeing, trees being taken out or trees just falling down. changes our entire environment. So if there's anything we can do in our code to make, to improve things or to help remediate or regenerate, I think it's a good idea. So I just want to say I'm in agreement.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If I could
I would like to suggest that, as most of us know, I think we did maybe some of this since Commissioners Trent and Swift joined the commission. But we have over the last 2 or 3 years worked on updates to Title 10 of the code.
Right.
I think Title 10 covers most of the topics that we've just been discussing here in the last few minutes. I'm not sure if stormwater is one of them that's
It
in
is.
Title 10. I think it's
Not in
probably
Title 10.
somewhere else.
It's in
It's
Title
Not in
10.
Title 10? Okay.
Yeah, it's in the MWELO, as was mentioned earlier by staff.
Oh, okay, so it's indirectly there at least.
Yeah,
Um,
I think along with what Commissioner Trent was saying is, the thing with the MWELO is it's a state mandate, and you can't be more lenient than the state mandate, but you can be more stringent. And there is reference to, keeping stormwater on site. And that could, that falls under the purview of even a civil engineer as well, and state laws with water management, where you keep the water, it's against the law to run the water onto your neighbor's property, but anything you can do in landscape to maintain it. But if you go back through that MWELO, you'll see that it is mentioned in there. But once again, maybe it needs to be more stringent, which is something we could do, potentially. I mean, if, the city.
Well, let me suggest this. If there are topics of this sort, landscaping, clearly, we know that's something that we've talked about, at least in part, as we went through clearing some of the obvious errors, omissions, or misreferences or things in Title
Right.
10 that we have already recommended to City Council. But there are a number of other areas that involve policy questions that we're
Correct.
talking about already that, the pandemic put a real crimp in our ability to even look at these things, discuss them, and bring them before the commission. I think we may be coming out of that now, and I would urge each commissioner to just briefly go through Title 10 and see if there are topics in there, and bring them back at the next
That's a
meeting
good
when we
idea.
have these comments, and Lucas and I can check and see if those are things that we're already planning on analyzing and bringing back to the commission. And if there are others, then we need to know about that, and we need to get, back in that rhythm as well. I don't know, has council done anything with anything we've recommended so far?
Not yet, but not on council's
Well,
back, but
that's-
on staff's back at this point.
And
we are-
you have at least one more body in the shop now.
I do
so-
now, yes, which has been very helpful. In addition to that, this is almost a nice little segue. In the coming meetings, there is going to be an opportunity for council, planning commission, joint meeting.
Okay.
And doing that, we're reintroducing that, and we're working on a schedule for
Couple
that
of years,
currently.
but it would be welcome.
Yes. So you could expect that in the not so far distant future. That's probably the best way to put that.
Terrific. Okay.
So very well. I mean, we could certainly put this on the agenda for discussion in terms of what items, when we end up having that joint meeting, we want to focus on. This commission wants to focus on. So
Yeah, we kind of focused on what's our role in the general plan update the last time we got together with council, I think, and we're at least beginning to see some of what that role is, and I think we all welcome it. Any other commissioners have any other business to bring before the commission? And if not, then at 9:17, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much.